Chapter 147, Born to Battle. A Xianxia had just tried to use a flying sword to attack the crescent moon hanging in the sky. Unexpectedly, this action seemed to enrage those harmless-looking rings of light. First, a light ring surrounded his body, then contracted. No one had expected a light ring that seemed to break with a touch could contain such great power. The sword Xiao instantly howled under the noose, his eyes flipping over, and fainted. Just as everyone was shocked, a black gold chain came down from the sky and accurately lassoed this unconscious Xianxia. Unconscious, judged loss, elimination from the competition. A cold voice sounded in everyone's ears and then it was quiet. Everyone knew it was the judges hidden in the shadows that had acted and saved this Xianxia. The judges that had been invited to the last round were all Jindan, and clearly were not average. They, naturally, could enter and leave the formation with ease, while the competitors were trapped by it. Other than shock, they also felt inspired. In terms of cultivation stages, there was only one stage between Ningmai and Jindan, but there was a vast difference in the power. For these Ningmai Xianxia, becoming Jindan was their dream, but they knew how difficult it was. Ningmai could be considered the backbone of Sky Moon Jia, and only becoming Jindan would mean you were considered an expert. Each year, countless people were blocked by this gate, but no one would retreat. If they passed this gate, that was really like carp jumping over the dragon gate, and soaring sky high. After that, there was also a long lifespan. Everyone wanted to live longer. But right now, they could only admire and be envious. They were young. Even though they had exceptional talent, their cultivation was shallow. In this 100 Xianxia, there was only a few that had reached the middle levels of Ningmai, and increases in cultivation were harder the further it went. Achieving Jindan before the age of 50 was an extremely difficult accomplishment. Zhuemo also heard the words of the judges, but at this time, he didn't have any thought of admiration. He almost started cursing. That judge had spoken without any warning, and frightened his hands into shaking, almost damaging the child formation he was setting up. Luckily, he forced Ling power in and managed to stabilize it. Everything inside the formation was under the cover of his consciousness. He naturally was clear that the Xianxia had been attacked. This was just the beginning. But he didn't relax his hands, he could not spare any attention. There were still 6 child formations before he could complete the 72, Sky Ring Moon Chime formation, S. Once he completed the 72 child formations, not only would the formation become more powerful, but the formation would gain an additional ability, control. He had controlled formations before, but those were only simple formations. He had never controlled such a complex and large formation. The difference between a formation that was controlled by a person, and one that was not, was the distance between heaven and earth. Most importantly, if he could control such a big formation, it would be an extremely exhilarating experience. Inside the formation, those experts were not dumb, and had their own calculations. Su bolstered her Ling power, the magnetic force forming an extremely small magnetic shell around her to protect her. Lu Li continued to wait for prey. Even though his void realm was suppressed in the big formation to a smaller area, but he was still motionless as his mind quickly pondered how to increase the size of his void realm in this formation. These two both were planning to defend and counterattack, one was in action, and the other was silent. Su frantically moved through the formation. Where was the damned guy hiding? And Changheng, he idly wandered through the formation in curiosity. The yellow-faced man behaved similarly to him. Gui Feng's movements were hard to follow, suddenly appearing and disappearing. Only Nan Men Yang was still howling, each blow faster than the previous as he sliced at the rings of light. No one dared to come close to him. Seeing Nan Men Yang's masculine and brutal demeanor combined with his fanatical expression, anyone that went near him would most likely get chopped down as well. Yu Bai was like a gust of wind, face dark as he searched for Nan Men Yang's figure in the formation. It was strange. The formation was just a bit over 10 mu, but the people in the formation seemed to be in a vast wilderness. They could occasionally encounter another person, but the majority of the time, they could not. Compared to the ease of some of these Xianxia, the fighting between the other Xianxia in the formation was much more brutal. In the air above the big formation, the two judges idly talked, occasionally glancing at the formation. One of the judges was wearing a green Taoist robe, a cloth over his head. His name was Wuling Sanren. The other person was extremely imposing, wearing Ling armor. His name was Wei Fei, and one of the well-known experts in Sky Moon Jia. This Suemo is really to my taste. What he's planning is the 72-child formation. Oh, he's pretty decisive. Wuling Sanren said, the setup of the formations might be very rough, but it still stuns me that he actually managed to finish this much, considering he's in Juji. Ha! Hearing this, Wei Fei teased, a pity that Pei Yuan ran and the others won't give this disciple to you. It is a pity. If he can learn from you for a few years, there probably wouldn't be anyone that could rival him in the younger generation in the field of formations. Wuling Sanren was one of those rare sword xiao that was skilled in formations, which was why Wei Fei said what he did. Wuling Sanren shook his head, such a talented disciple, which sect would not treasure him? Between his words, he was extremely depressed. He had long wanted a disciple suited to him, but never found one. The disciples he had now, they did work hard to cultivate the sword, but had no interest in formations. His skill in formations was Wuling Sanren's proudest skill. Now that no one would inherit these skills from him, how could he not be bothered? If Wukong's sword sect allowed Zuemo to enter his sect, he was willing to spend anything. But he also knew that was impossible. Even a normal sect wouldn't agree, much less Wukong's sword sect that was aiming to recover its former glory. Ice Dragon Sword's reputation was not loud in the ears of normal Xianxia of Sky Moon Jia, but to Jin Dan like him, Ice Dragon Sword's reputation was clear. Ha! Sanren is also troubled. This Suemo will not enter another sect, but Wukong's sword sect is definitely having a headache. Wei Fei's words were full of amusement. Wei Fei's words were accurate. Pei Yuan Ran felt an extreme migraine. Now that the situation was like this, he wasn't thinking about victory or defeat. In his perspective, victory did not matter, but how could he teach Suemo? Undoubtedly, after this competition, Suemo's fame in the field of formations would reach a new height. In their eyes, Suemo had originally been a problematic youth, extremely hard to deal with. Now, this problematic youth had become famous, very famous. Thinking that the sect would have a famous, wealthy, and extremely talented but problematic youth, Pei Yuan Ran felt like he was a mouse pulling a turtle, not knowing how to act. Right now, he did not know that Suemo was penniless. Suemo had won such a large sum of Jingxia last time, even a sect leader like Pei Yuan Ran would never ever dream that Suemo would be so crazy as to spend it all. Suemo's heart jumped. The formation was under great pressure. He hadn't thought that Nan Men Yang would be so crazy, one blow after another, each blow stronger than the previous. Does Ji have a disagreement with you? Suemo was extremely furious. If this kept on going, this, Sky Ring Moon Chime formation, would really quickly break under the brute force of this barbarian. He knew that he couldn't just set up formations again. If the formation broke, there was no meaning to him setting them up. Inside the Sky Ring Moon Chime formation, Nan Men Yang had really gotten into the swing of it. He had given 7 or 8 blows, but it did not look like there was any effect on the formation. His thought was extremely simple: if he hadn't broken this thing yet, then it was because he didn't use enough power. Nan Men Yang went completely crazy. The golden light on his body brightened. Under that thick golden light, even the large sword seemed to be covered with a tangible gold light. His hair standing on end, he looked like a furious golden lion. His eyes turned golden, staring at the rings of light above the sky. They seemed to have felt the danger from Nan Men Yang. The rings of light that had been swimming freely started to gather around Nan Men Yang's position. The presence that Nan Men Yang emitted was truly too strong, like the sun in the dark of the night. Yu Bai's black face became even darker as he spotted the light, a cold light flashing through his eyes. He unhesitatingly twisted his body and started to fly in the direction of Nan Men Yang. Feeling the battle intent and strong presence from Nan Men Yang, everyone understood his next attack would be extremely powerful. Oh, is the formation about to break? Zhong Ming Yen thought with slight boredom. He swung the plum branch in his hand. Maybe he should go find an opponent. Who should he find? That Chang Heng seemed pretty strong. It wasn't just Zhong Ming Yen that thought so. Nan Men Yang's presence was truly too astonishing that even a person as unconcerned as Chang Heng usually was couldn't help but change expression. Su's expression changed dramatically. It was over. The next attack that Nan Men Yang would give, even she wouldn't dare to meet it. Any Xianxia inside the formation wouldn't dare to meet Nan Men Yang's blow. But if Suimo lost, her flying sword, the formation was going to break. Her heart was filled with hopelessness. Just at this time, a change suddenly occurred. Arg! An angry howl that could rival Nan Men Yang suddenly sounded inside the formation. A gigantic golden person with blurred features came down from the sky and landed heavily in front of Nan Men Yang. Seal Soldier. Nan Men Yang raised his golden eyes, and grinned. He was completely sunken into a berserker rage. Anyone that appeared in front of him would be immediately torn to pieces. Die! A roar like that of a lion, Nan Men Yang's eyes glared angrily, the golden light on his body even brighter, as he swung his giant sword with both hands heavily at the seal soldier. Feeling the threat and battle intent from Nan Men Yang, the seal soldier revealed a pair of eyes among the blurred features. A pair of eyes filled with indifference and pressure. Countless seals that covered the armor of the seal soldier like earthworms suddenly light up. Its thick left leg heavily stomped, causing the ground to shake. Its right leg soundlessly moved back, the right fist moving in front of its body. Its lower half positioned like a bow, while the right fist was like a readied arrow waiting to be launched. It faced the golden sword energy, and released its punch. Born to battle. An authoritative and deep voice sounded out like thunder rolling through the clouds. A tangible golden light fist shot forth from its punch like a heavy hammer and thundered forth. Golden sword energy versus golden light fist. Chapter 148 Seal Soldier Bam. The deep reverberation of the collision seemed to beat on everyone's hearts. There was no explosion like they had imagined, no light blazing in all directions. The two balls of golden light had been like two flames colliding with each other and extinguishing at the same time. Nan Men Yang's entire body shuddered, the anger inside his golden pupils increasing slightly. He shouted, "Go die!" The golden light of the large sword in his hands was even brighter than before, and it was like a shining sun. In the blink of an eye, even the crescent moon over the large formation seemed to have lost its sheen and become dull. Mountain Breaker Sword. The tip of the sword started to tilt downwards. The howl from the golden sword tip slicing past air started from a nearly non-existent sound and then suddenly, like a monster being torn apart, gave an extremely shrill shout. The completed sword energy of the golden sword was like a golden crescent moon, howling as it flew towards the seal soldier. The seals covering the body of the seal soldier became even brighter, like there were worms moving. On that blurred face, that pair of eyes became abnormally cold and distant, but its expression was indifferent as usual. Born to battle. The words were heavily enunciated out from the mouth of the seal soldier slowly and clearly, his leg moving as he prepared to punch. Another punch came. The golden light in the shape of a fist left its hand, the booming it created was like the lava roiling in the deep of the earth. It charged forward forcefully like it could not be blocked. Bam! It was another heavy and deep reverberation. The ground suddenly shook, also shaking people's hearts. Some Xianxia that had been watching changed their expressions and started to fall back. Nan Men Yang's gigantic figure shuddered again. The hairs that stood up on his head seemed to be blown by the wind restlessly. Both sword blows had been ineffective. The battle desire and the craziness in Nan Men Yang's chest shot to its peak. The golden pupils started to burn as if they were two golden balls of fire. The golden light over his body started to retreat inwards. On his body, a thin, almost tangible, and golden armor suddenly appeared. The thick golden energy that surrounded that gigantic sword in his hand spat and wavered like a flame. As though it felt the final battle had arrived, the bright seals on the silent seal soldier seemed to have come alive, like bugs that moved along the soldier's armor before quickly flowing towards the right fist it had beside its chest. The authoritative eyes of the seal soldier became even deeper, almost until it was a void, empty of everything. Go die. The angry roar was like a bolt of lightning. The blue-green mist around him suddenly exploded outward, with him at the center, clearing out one zhang of empty space. The power of one shout was extremely mighty. He slowly moved, creating a blow. There was not one speck of sound. But it was as though every muscle in Nan Men Yang's body was following this sword. When the sword was just halfway through the air, a suffocating pressure pressed the ground into cracking. Born to battle. The deep voice was not loud, but it carried a different kind of power that directly pierced the heart. A resolute conviction was in these words, filling everyone's hearts. All the seals on the body flooded into its right fist. Its body became extremely dull. The entire body, other than the fist that was even brighter than before, the other part started to blur like it was golden mist that could dissipate at any time. Its action was the exact same as before. Step and then punch. A transparent fist exploded from its right fist, a fist that looked as though it was carved from clear crystal. The fist didn't hit Nan Men Yang. When it was halfway there, when Nan Men Yang's sword was in the midst of falling down, it suddenly exploded. Bam! This muffled sound was even deeper than the last two, but the Xianxia who saw this fist and hand, and heard this muffled thunderous sound, couldn't help but shake. Bam bam bam. Nan Men Yang went back 3 steps. The golden armor over his body became golden light again, his expression slightly wilted. Opposite him where the seal soldier had just been standing, there was nothing left. Good opponent. Nan Men Yang might be slightly wilted but still couldn't help but shout in admiration, his eyes slightly regretful as he looked at the spot the seal soldier had disappeared. Just as this time, Yu Bai's furious voice that was full of hatred passed into Nan Men Yang's ears. Nan Men Yang. I'll kill you. In the corner of the sky ring moon chime formation, Zhua Mo spat out a mouthful of blood, startling to the eye when the bright red blood landed on the ground. He had been controlling the seal soldier. Nan Men Yang's last blow far surpassed the limits of his tolerance. He had just been controlling the seal soldier to face Nan Men Yang, yet he had been wounded in one blow. He couldn't help but feel deep awe at Nan Men Yang's power. He wiped away the blood at the corner of his mouth, expressionlessly baring his teeth. Barbarian. Go play with Little White. Forcibly controlling the turbulent Ling power in his body, he gritted his teeth and continued to set up formations. The Xianxia inside the formation had been enchanted and deeply shocked by the 3 rounds between Nan Men Yang and the seal soldier. It was a straightforward competition of only brute power, there was no technique, no dodging. Many people were awed. Nan Men Yang's strength had been judged to be not bad, but due to the fact he was a grassroots cultivator, he was not judged very highly by other people. The great majority only believed that he would have a pretty good future. No one could have thought that he would have such terrifying power. Thinking about Nan Men Yang looking like a god of war just moments ago, many people's hearts became slightly cold. But what was even more unexpected to them was another person, Zhua Mo. Seal soldiers might be rare, but it couldn't enter the eyes of these people. The absolute majority of sword Xiao would snort at these kinds of seals. Of course, the crux of the matter was the power. In the seal soldiers they had seen before, not one had been so powerful. Most importantly, the person controlling this seal soldier was a Xianxia in the stages of Zhuji. This upturned many of the fixed ideas in their heads. The difference between stages was not something that just a seal soldier could change. However, Xuemo accomplished it. Even though he had just been on par for 3 moves, but in the eyes of everyone else, it was already a miracle. Up until now, the weakest competitor of the sword test conference still hadn't shown his face. This undoubtedly implied another bit of information. Xuemo still had tricks left. The great formation still was unmoved. The rings of light that had gathered over Nan Men Yang's head had all dissipated, moving around freely like they did before. Xuemo's surprising performance attracted the interest of many people. Like Changheng. He had only found the formation interesting, which was why he entered, but Xuemo's strong performance created great interest from him. He was very curious, just how far could Xuemo go? It wasn't just him that had the thought. In the air, Wuling Sanren sighed gently in surprise. Not bad. To be able to meet Nan Men Yang head on 3 times, he used the seal soldier well. A strange light came into Wei Fei's eyes. His consciousness seems very large. That is rarely seen. Is Wukong's sword sect also skilled in cultivating the spirit? Without consciousness, he can't afford to play with formations. Wuling Sanren said, expression normal. That's true. Wei Fei nodded and said. Behind the black gauze, Su's little mouth almost couldn't close. The shock that the 3 rounds had given her was too strong. Different from other people, she had seen Wang Shixiang at Lingying's sect use the seal soldier when Xuemo had gone to challenge Lingying's sect. It looked as though it was the same seal soldier, but the difference in power was drastic. She suspected that this seal soldier could even defeat 3 of the seal soldiers she saw last time. Maybe, he really did have some moves, and didn't need her help. For the first time, she started to waver in her own thoughts. She suddenly remembered the words that Lin Xianxia had said to her. A copper coin appeared in a hand that was hidden in her sleeve. At the center of a coin, an eye had been carved. The eye on the copper coin started to glow slightly. At the same time, the expression of the yellow-faced man slightly changed, his body became motionless. He seemed to have suddenly turned to a piece of rock, without any of the presence a person would have. The copper coin in Su's hand brightened and then extinguished. The rock in Su's heart landed. Everything about Lin Shixiang was good, but he was just slightly paranoid. Up until now, she still didn't quite believe what Lin Shixiang had said. If it wasn't that Lin Shixiang had taken out her sex token, she probably would have already attacked him. Just now, someone used Fire Eye again. Pu Yao suddenly came out. Xuemo didn't have the time to pay attention to him. As long as you remain silent, no one can find you. You seem to have encountered trouble. Pu Yao asked in interest. In his eyes, Xuemo was afraid of death, and always put his own security at the most important position. He hadn't ever saw Xuemo respond like so when he was discussing the problem of safety with Xuemo. This group of people is pouring salt onto the wound. Xuemo gritted through his teeth, his hands not slowing. You want to give your all against them? Pu Yao clearly was laughing at his misfortunes. Xuemo was too lazy to pay attention to this perverse Ren Yao who had nothing to do. You have the Yao seed, why don't you try to use the Yao seed to manipulate the consciousness and control the formation? Pu Yao kindly suggested. Use the Yao seed to manipulate the consciousness and control the formation? Xuemo reflexively shook his head. The Sky Ring Moon Chime formation needs all 72 child formations to be completed before it can be controlled. You don't just have the Sky Ring Moon Chime formation. Pu Yao said disapprovingly. Right. Why hadn't he thought of that? Xuemo felt his vision light up. He had made a great misunderstanding. All of his mind had been thinking about completing the 72 child formation, sky ring moon chime formation, and completely forgot that he hadn't just set up the formations for sky ring moon chime formation. This was an extremely large-scale formation belt. Actually, other than increasing the rate your consciousness grows, the Yao seed's other use is splitting your mind. Pu Yao was strangely good today. It was extremely rare that he would take the initiative and teach Sui Mo without Sui Mo needing to pay Jingshi. Splitting my attention. Sui Mo irritably rolled his eyes. At this time, you want me to split my attention? The so-called splitting the mind is referring to splitting your consciousness into several parts, all of them working at the same time on their own matters. Pu Yao said faintly. The great majority of Yao will split this consciousness, and some Yao are born with this ability. Truly powerful Yao are able to split their consciousness into thousands of portions, and are peerlessly strong. But at this time, Sui Mo completely did not think about why Pu Yao was so strange today. He was shocked by Pu Yao's words. It was like a bolt of lightning hitting his mind. Consciousness splitting. If he split his consciousness and they all did their own things at once. Up until now, he had always thought of the consciousness as one whole entity, and had never thought about splitting the consciousness to do different things at once. He suddenly thought of Ling power. Ling power could break off and merge. Was the consciousness like Ling power as well, able to be broken up and merged together? If it really was possible. Sui Mo's hands, which hadn't stopped since the beginning, suddenly stopped in the air. Chapter 149 Fire. Watching Yu Bai and Nan Men Yang embroiled in battle, no one could look away. Just having gone 3 rounds, Nan Men Yang was completely suppressed by Yu Bai, unable to lift his head under the blows. Yu Bai didn't use his usual style of fighting, instead each blow was vicious, decisive, and aimed to kill, causing a chill to creep into the hearts of everyone watching inside the formation. When a composed person was angry, it was very frightening. Probably the only person that found it boring was Changheng. This level of fighting and killing, it really couldn't alert his mind. He scanned the surroundings. Everyone had stopped their actions. The 3 rounds between Nan Men Yang and the seal soldier had shaken the skies, and attracted almost all the Xianxia inside the formation. Right now, the fight between Nan Men Yang and Yu Bai was not as blood-rousing as the previous fight, but the technique was no less spectacular. One had a grassroots background with no family or sect, the other the beloved disciple of the ruler of Dongfu. Once the two really became serious, the scene was amazingly spectacular, the spectators becoming intoxicated. Without detecting it, all the Xianxia inside the formation had gathered together again. Changheng raised his head to look at the rings of light swimming in the air and the crescent moon high up, his expression slightly moved. He took away his gaze because he noticed, not far away, Zhong Mingyan was looking at him. Their gazes met midair, striking like 2 extremely sharp swords, sparks flying. 2 stubborn and proud young experts exchanged a look. Fight? Zhong Mingyan opened coldly, his gaze full of challenge. Not interested. Changheng only glanced at Zhong Mingyan before moving his eyes back towards the sky. The rings of light that were freely swimming in the air seemed to be more attractive for him. Zhong Mingyan's eyes slightly shrunk, but he didn't make another challenge. Changheng's viciousness and brutality was the greatest in the sword test conference. Every competitor, when they faced this brute, couldn't help but shrink inwards, including Zhong Mingyan. Zhong Mingyan's expression turned back to normal as he said faintly, "Why don't we use the breaking of the formation to wager victory and defeat?" Changheng's face was still upraised, not looking at Zhong Mingyan even once, as he said, "Oh, I'm afraid you might not even break it." Zhong Mingyan could clearly feel Changheng's low opinion, and his expression was extremely ugly. He snorted coldly. "You may be underestimating me a little too much. You could try." Changheng pointed at the sky, and said, "Face normal." Hearing this, Zhong Mingyan was too lazy to respond to Changheng. The 7-plum sword appeared in his hand. A shake of the wrist, and 3 plum flowers turned to 3 streams of light that flew into the sky. Zhong Mingyan wanted Changheng to see his strength, so his first move was his most accomplished, 3 play. 3 sword essences were like 3 slinking fish as they circled around and shot at the crescent moon in the sky. Zhuemo had been pondering how to split his consciousness when he suddenly detected an abnormality in the formation and instantly woke up. Fuck, would they never stop? Having just made a tiny bit of headway, Zhuemo was so angry he swore. When he found the person responsible was Zhong Mingyan, the anger in his heart shot upwards. He remembered. This guy was the first person that had made trouble. It was an anger that came from the chest, and hate from the gallbladder. Zhuemo's anger erupting from his heart, instantly sunk into his second rage. Ji's long found this guy an eyesore. Zhuemo's eyes were green. The 2 hands that had stopped started again. He finally understood. Given the time and place, it wasn't the moment good time to ponder about how to split his consciousness. These people that had poured salt onto the wound might all be terribly evil, but each of them had the power to damage the formation. If he couldn't complete the 72 child formation, Sky Ring Moon Chime formation, he couldn't do anything to them. Without him detecting it, he had started to think of ways to deal with the experts inside the formation. He completely forgot that each person in there had power that far surpassed him. However, Zhuemo was facing the same difficult problem as before. He must, before he could complete the 72 child formation, Sky Ring Moon Chime formation, stop these people from damaging it. The 72 child formations were just on the edge of completion, and these people had come out again to make a mess. Just now, he had used up the seal soldier to stop Nan Menyang from breaking the formation. Now, what could he use to stop Zhong Mingyan from breaking the formation? Did you think Ji only had a seal soldier? Zhuemo gritted his teeth as he cursed Zhong Mingyan inside 100 times. But, at the same time, his consciousness silently flowed forth like a stream of water. His body slightly leaned forward, his back curved. He looked like a curved bow from far away. He maintained this strange position without moving, only his eyes slightly narrowed like a hunter waiting for his prey. Zhong Mingyan's 3 sword essences were like piranhas that landed in a rich swarm of fish. Any ring of light that tried to come near the sword essences were instantly sliced to pieces. The 3 spiraling sword energies did not look like they were affected at all. Carrying a hiss that could shock souls, they headed straight for the crescent moon in the sky. In his eyes, that bright moon was clearly the crux to breaking the formation. If he could destroy the moon, the entire formation would be solved. The layers of light rings were like a thick coat, unable to be damaged by knife or axe. But if a narrow needle was pushed, it could easily pierce through this layer of cloth. The 3 sword energies did not stop their spinning, forming a sharp cutting formation. Each sword energy was like the sharpest blade, its penetrating power far surpassing normal sword energies. The rings of light that had blocked his, 1 cut plum, were easily penetrated when faced with this, 3 play. The sword energies were as fast as lightning, nothing that the rings of light could catch up to. But the rings of light seemed to be alive. Knowing they couldn't block the sword energies, they headed towards Zhong Mingyan. Ring after ring of light landed from the sky, heading to cover Zhong Mingyan. Even as powerful as Zhong Mingyan was, he didn't easily experiment. Everyone had a deep impression of the Xianxia that was eliminated. Paired sparrow flying. 2 plum flowers fell off the plum branch like 2 butterflies, flying around Zhong Mingyan. Once the rings of light came at Zhong Mingyan from the sky, a clear cracking sound could be heard before they were blown to pieces, turning into countless scattered energies. However, the rings of light did not give up moving towards Zhong Mingyan. Clink clink clink. The dense crisp sounds were like hundreds of glass cups being smashed at once. The broken energies fell and floated around Zhong Mingyan, and then were blown away by the winds created by the 2 plum flowers. Amidst the broken energies, Zhong Mingyan was unharmed. Young people really have energy. The yellow-faced male had appeared at some time beside Changheng and snickered. Changheng still was looking at the sky, and responded indifferently, "He's dumb." That's good. It will let us save some energy. The yellow-faced man smiled and said. Changheng heard this, and turned to look at the yellow-faced male. "Who are you searching for?" "Searching for?" The yellow-faced man seemed to not understand. "Your strength is greater than anyone here." Changheng said faintly, "Hiding your strength, not competing for a rank, you naturally have other goals. You've been constantly running here and there, and look as though you are trying to find something. This is Great Pine Pavilion. I've never heard there was anything good there. That means there is only one possibility, you are trying to find someone." The smile on the yellow-faced male's face disappeared, his eyes gradually turning sharp as a knife. Changheng's face was as indifferent as usual. The yellow-faced man suddenly clapped his hands and smiled. "Others only know you for your viciousness and bloodthirst. No one would think you have such a mind for details. I underestimated you. We do not have a conflict." Changheng, from beginning to end, had a calm expression as though he was speaking of something that had no bearing on him. The yellow-faced man lightly sighed. "Not here." He could not disguise the disappointment. "That's a pity," Changheng said, face calm. But he didn't say why it was a pity. In Zhuomo's sea of consciousness, Pu sat on the gravestone, his eyes looking into the distance. There was a mirth floating at the corner of his mouth that was somewhat hard to decipher. It seemed slightly scornful, slightly reminiscent, slightly lonely, slightly cold. Different from Pu Yao, who was as steady as Mount Tai, Zhuomo was like the arrow that was on the thread that would sever at a touch. That crescent moon might not be the cover door, but if it was attacked, Zhuomo also knew what would happen. The time did not allow him to think more. 3 blue lights that were like chains suddenly appeared, dragon tying formation. The position the blue chains appeared were extremely precise, exactly on the path that the spiraling sword energies would pass. Different than the dragon tying formation that Zhuomo had used before, once the 3 blue chains appeared, they knotted into a clasp that could perfectly restrain the 3 sword energies. The 3 sword energies headed straight into the clasp. The strength of the clasp far surpassed Zhong Mingyan's expectations, it didn't break. Just as Zhong Mingyan paused, a web of fire suddenly appeared in the sky. An enormous, dense and deep blue web of fire. The 7 greenwood flags absorbed the water power, continuously turning it into wood power. Beside each greenwood flag, there were 7 second-grade little copper lion head cauldrons. Deep red flames spat out from the mouth of the lion heads on the copper lion head cauldrons and gathered in the air. After gathering, the redness of the flames became fainter. Around each of the 7 cauldrons, with 12 jade cards as bone, and the red gold thread as the channels, it formed a 3-turn fire formation. After 3 turns, the fire was almost completely clear. 7 near-transparent flames flew in the sky, crisscrossing in the air. The 7 by 7 49 Little Dan Cauldrons formation, a Great Leaf Fire formation. Once the formation formed, each string of fire shook. The nearly transparent flames changed again, and became tinged with a slightly tranquil blue. This was the enormous tranquil blue web of fire that everyone saw up in the air. The tranquil blue web of fire perfectly blocked the 3 sword energies and Zhong Mingyan. Zhong Mingyan's expression slightly changed. This web of fire had actually cut the connection between him and the 3 sword energies. At the same time, the blue dragon tying chains that was around the 3 sword energies suddenly pulled and swung towards the side. Bam! In the end, the blue dragon tying chains was not able to stop the 3 combined sword essences, and was shred into pieces. But with this pull and swing, the aim of the 3 sword essences diverged. They brushed past that crescent moon, entering the air and disappeared. Everyone was shocked still by the fire web that suddenly appeared over their heads. The tranquil blue threads of fire were silent. It was like there was an enormous and tranquil blue spiderweb over their heads. But many of them did not pale because of the thick tranquil blue fire threads. Instead, the terrifying heat that was released startled everyone. The flame was tranquil blue. How high would its temperature reach? The tranquil blue web of fire freely burned on. The interior of the formation had become an enormous Dan cauldron. In the air, Wuling Sanren and Wei Fei saw this extremely awe-inspiring scene. The moisture of the half-moose-sized pond roiled, abnormally lively. They turned to streams of water power, continuously flooding into the greenwood flag masts. The green and silent wood energy entered the copper lion head cauldrons, turning into deep red fire power, then through the three-turn fire formation, it then entered the great leaf fire formation, and knotted into a web. Wei Fei stared with wide eyes, muttering to himself, uncanny workmanship. Godly technique. Chapter 150, New Targets. Mo was in a predicament. Bean-sized beads of sweat flowed down his face. He had underestimated the difficulty of controlling this greatly fire seal formation. To pursue power, he had done his best to strengthen the formation from every aspect. The direct result was the difficulty in controlling the formation had also increased. Behind the spectacular display, the series of manipulations he had done were all highly difficult. Even though Mo's skill and control had increased, the unexpected difficulty of controlling the formation had created a great problem for him. His body shook like dice. In a short moment, sweat suddenly started to appear on his body. In a moment he appeared to have been just dunked in water. It was too hard. Damn it. Mo cautiously began using all of his consciousness to control every tiny change in the formation. Formations were a kind of work that demanded meticulousness. Any kind of mistake could create an extremely large effect, and cause the effect of the formation to vary drastically. The complexity of a formation belt that was composed of many kinds of formations that were maximized for effect was even more so. Mo did not notice that he had bitten through his lips, and blood was seeping out. His consciousness was using the five-colored pagoda to carefully control the web of fire. Having finally stopped Zhong Mingyan's attack, Mo didn't have the time to rejoice. He had reached his limits, the web of fire was almost out of control. Mo's eyes widened into circles, the tendons in his forehead pulsing. If he lost control of the fire web, for him, that meant failure. The temperature of the tranquil blue fire was the strongest flame that he had ever seen since he learned Dan making. The uncontrolled fire web would collapse in an instant, and the flowing tranquil blue fire would destroy all of the formations. That was definitely not allowed. But he had reached the last of his endurance. He could feel the Ling power in his body quickly depleting. His weak cultivation once again became his Achilles heel. However, he had no time to think about this right now. He had to make a choice. He didn't even pause to think. Grunting, he gathered the last of his power. The gigantic tranquil blue fire suddenly pushed downwards. The Xianxia in the formation below instantly moved. Did Mo want to get them all at once? He didn't know his power. A cold smile appeared on the corner of many of the Xianxia's mouths. From their perspective, a Zhuji Xianxia was sending them a challenge through this method. These people whose eyes were always looking upwards, how could they bear a Zhuji looking down at them? Many competitors were preparing eagerly to try to test the power of the web of fire. Just at this time, a deep and raspy sound suddenly echoed through the formation. Bind! The web of fire that had covered the sky suddenly shrunk extremely, heading for Zhong Mingyan. This caused the Xianxia that had prepared to fight to pause. They instantly revealed expressions of anticipation to see the result. No one would be dumb to block the web of fire for Zhong Mingyan. Anger came onto Zhong Mingyan's face. He gave a heavy snort. His expression serious, the seven-plumb sword in his hand turned to a flash of dark light that headed for the web of fire. As the seven-plumb sword entered the air, it turned to a gigantic sword energy, forcefully piercing the net. The tranquil blue fire web unexpectedly shrunk again, actually taking along the sword and person to the middle of the web. When the sword energy sliced the web of fire, Xuemo spat out a handful of blood again, his face becoming even paler. But did the situation allow him to retreat? He suddenly bit the tip of his tongue, the salty and fishy taste of blood making his mind alert. He suddenly pushed out his last bit of power. His spiritual and Ling power was almost empty at this time. Xuemo was bleeding from his nose and mouth, but he did not detect it. The last bit of consciousness burrowed into the five-colored pagoda. The five-colored pagoda suddenly burst in light. Under the crescent moon, it flashed with five-colored light. Zhong Mingyan's expression finally changed. The web of fire had not neared him, but the rising temperature was already enough for him to feel fear. He didn't dare to hold anything back. He jumped into the air, closely following the flying sword. All his Ling power was channeled into the flying sword. There was only one thought in his mind: break out of this web of fire. Using all his power, the sword essence of the seven-plumb sword suddenly was as sharp as the cold wind at the top of a cliff. Suddenly, it was like there was an old winter plum standing in the wind. Hiss! The flying sword broke through the fire web. Zhong Mingyan felt joy, but just at this time, a change occurred. Die! Xuemo's muffled shout was like thunder, rolling and exploding inside the formation. The web of fire suddenly retreated inwards to the center. Zhong Mingyan felt that the tranquil blue flame was all around him, as though he was inside a large Dan cauldron, and would turn to ash at any instant. Fear in his heart, he hurriedly activated the Ling armor. Countless tranquil blue flames landed on Zhong Mingyan's body. Ah! Zhong Mingyan shrieked, the light of the flying sword suddenly becoming disordered. Just as everyone assumed that Zhong Mingyan would lose his life, the countless tranquil blue flame suddenly disappeared. Yet there were still many flames that had landed on Zhong Mingyan's Ling armor. Dong Qi sword sect was not famous for its defense. The power of these tranquil blue flames were astounding. Even with the protection of the Ling armor, Zhong Mingyan was in terrible straits. His entire body was burnt black, Ling armor completely damaged. He was like a piece of wood burnt black, dropping from the sky. The other Xianxia inside the formation all inhaled in shock. Who was the person dropping down? It was Zhong Mingyan. This formation was truly too strong, even Zhong Mingyan had been defeated. The Xianxia that had wanted to try solving the formation instantly stopped in their tracks. When they saw the unconscious Zhong Mingyan and the terrible state of his body as he laid on the ground, they really didn't bear to look at him. Holy moly! Even Zhong Mingyan wasn't a match. Was this formation really just something a Zhuji had made? The same question flowed through every Xianxia inside the formation. Xuemo hadn't put all of his effort in at the end. If he hadn't stopped, then all of the tranquil blue flames would have bombarded Zhong Mingyan. It would have been hard to say if Zhong Mingyan would have managed to survive. In other words, the formation that Xuemo set up was able to kill a Ningmai Xianxia. Everyone jumped in fright. In one moment, all the Xianxia that had been fighting in the formation completely stopped attacking each other. A serious expression came onto their faces. They were still inside the formation. But what they didn't realize was that Xuemo had no intentions of letting the Zhong Mingyan off. At the end, even his mind had been blurred. How would he know when to stop? All of his spiritual and Ling power had been used up. He had fainted, which was what had caused the flames to disappear. When Xuemo slowly woke up from unconsciousness, the desire for battle and courage had long ago flew into the horizons. As expected, the ignorant had no fear. Just now, he had actually been locked in combat directly with Zhong Mingyan. He suddenly tilted his head. He remembered now. Before he had fainted, he had actually defeated Zhong Mingyan. He grinned, but with his expressionless face, it looked extremely strange. How long had he been unconscious? He struggled to get up, looking at the surroundings. He was still inside the formation. The people still hadn't solved the formation. Zhuemo felt that this was extremely absurd. Even now, he still found it hard to accept that he had just defeated Zhong Mingyan. Zhuemo didn't know that he had just been unconscious for the time of an incense stick. This was due to his extremely deep practice of Vajra Profound Sutra. If he didn't practice that, it would have been many days until he would wake up. And he would never have predicted that in the time that he had been unconscious, no one tried to break the formation. It was the opposite. The Xianxia in the formation started to attack other people, no matter if it was Su or Guifeng. Even Changheng had entered the fight. The other people started to clean up the other Xianxia inside the formation. Wuling Sanren and Wei Fei had started to get busy. Changheng and the others were acting out of caution. They had just seen the power of the formation. No one dared to be careless. To solve the formation, they had to put in all their power. But if there were opponents beside them, who would dare to give their all? If Zhuemo thought of all this, he would definitely feel proud of himself. A cultivator just in Zhuji that made so many Ningmai wary and put them on the defensive, it was enough to be proud. However, Zhuemo had just woken up and his gaze had landed on the incomplete, sky ring moon chime formation. In reality, while it looked like he had won the battle against Zhong Mingyan, but in reality, he had accomplished it through self-harm. The wounds he had received when controlling the seal soldier to face Nan Menyang had worsened and he completely lost the power to keep fighting. So unprofitable. The first thought that popped into Zhuemo's mind was this. Looking at these sky ring moon chime child formations, the pain in his heart reached a peak, far more painful than the pain from his physical body. So many Jingshi were wasted. He had bought all of these materials from the 100 Treasures Flying Pavilion in order to attend this competition. He felt like he had taken a large sum of Jingshi, and made an extremely incorrect investment. It looked like he hadn't gained anything at all, and lost everything. No. Definitely not. Zhuemo gritted his teeth and sat up. He had to finish the 72 child formation, sky ring moon chime formation. He wasn't thinking of the Kunlun jade scroll. His actions were just to not waste all the materials he had already used. He had spent so many materials, he had to hear a sound from them. As he endured the pain, Zhuemo comforted himself so. Right now, he completely did not have any energy to continue, so he sat down and meditated. He needed to quickly recover his ling and spiritual power. Otherwise, he wouldn't even get to hear a sound. Consequently, an extremely strange scene appeared. Zhuemo was safely meditating in the formation to recover ling and spiritual power while Changheng and the others were engaged in fierce combat inside the formation. The other Xianxia might not be as good as the experts, but the ones that dared to enter the formation were not ordinary in their power. These Xianxia were not stupid. They instantly knew what Changheng and the others intended, and naturally would not wait to be eliminated. If one person couldn't win, then two of them would fight together. Amidst the shouts, the howls of the flying swords, the bangs and crashes, Zhuemo silently meditated. 45 minutes later, he finally opened his eyes. In possession of the Mo matrix and Yao seed, he recovered ling and spiritual power. With the exception of Pu Yao, he had never encountered a Xianxia that could recover faster than himself. Yet even in this little span of time, only 5 people were left remaining in the formation. Su, Guifeng, Changheng, the yellow-faced man, Luo Li, Yu Bai and Nan Menyang had fought too hard and expended too much energy. It could be said that both of them had lost. They had been tricked by Changheng and the yellow-faced man working together. As for the other people, they had been eliminated even earlier on. The pitiful Zhong Mingyan had been saved by Wuling Sanren a long time ago. Suemo did not attend to the 5 people. Pushing down his wounds, he kept on setting up the sky ring moon chime formation. The target that he gave himself right now was extremely realistic. Finish the 72 child formation, sky ring moon chime formation. If he couldn't get the jade scroll, he'd get experience. Chapter 151, Comprehension. Su suddenly moved next to Luo Li. Luo Li silently put up his guard. Yours will mo Xixiang. Su decided she would do it herself. Up until now, that soft rice zombie still hadn't responded at all. The soft rice zombie might not care about victory, but she had to. Luo Li made a sound in surprise. One for each of us. Su spoke very quickly. I picked Gui Feng. Luo Li was even more surprised. Was she Zhou Mo's friend? Was it true or false? His brain moved quickly, balancing the advantages and disadvantages. He was still on his guard, but his mouth did not hesitate in saying, okay, I picked the yellow-faced one. Even if he could not judge the sincerity, but from every angle, there was no detriment to him. The two split apart. The other 3 people clearly heard the words between the 2 people. Changheng was not affected. The yellow-faced male smiled. Gui Feng vanished where he stood. Everyone was extremely cooperative, each person finding a place to fight. Only Changheng was left at the original spot, raising his head to look at the rings of light, sinking into his thoughts. Suemo didn't pay attention to what was happening in the formation. After making a decision, he didn't move from it. The wounds on his body were greatly affecting him. When he channeled Ling power, there would be a bit of a pause. Ever since he had started practicing embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, it had been a long time since he had tasted the pain of spiritual wounds. But in the last 2 fights, even his most skilled consciousness could not avoid being injured. This was the result of fighting a battle that crossed stages. Even if he managed to use the formation as help, he still could not avoid being injured. However, on the surface, no one would think that his channels and internal organs were wounded. His gaze was concentrated and calm, clear and serene without a stray thought. The finger movements were not lightning fast as before, but it was still flowing, and gave onlookers another kind of beauty. In the air, Wuling Sanren couldn't help but exclaim, this boy would definitely accomplish great things. Wei Fei also had an expression of admiration. With Zhuji cultivation, to be able to block 3 full-force blows from Nan Men Yen, to seriously wound Zhong Ming Yen, he has enough to be proud. The heavens really have heavily blessed Wukong sword sect. One Wei Sheng, one Zuemo, there will be no worries for 100 years. For some reason, Wuling Sanren suddenly sighed. Such a pity they are not born at the right time. When the nest is attacked, would any egg escape? Such talent, if they fall early, it would be a pity. Wei Fei roared in laughter. I have the opposite opinion from Sanren. It is because they have outstanding talent that they need to undergo more grinding. Heroes are born in troubled times. Without troubled times, it is rare to see heroes. Hearing this, Wuling Sanren said, self-mockingly. Brother Wei is right. I'm old now. Without a stray thought on his mind, or desire for victory, Zuemo was extremely calm. The speed that he made formations increased greatly without his own knowledge. He seemed to not have to think and the materials would flow past from his fingers, the spells naturally cast, everything smooth and flowing. In a short time, the 72 child formation, Sky Ring Moon Chime formation, actually was completed. He dazedly looked at the big formation and he seemed to be in slight disbelief yet was also slightly thoughtful. In this short amount of time, he seemed to have experienced very much. A hard fight, receiving serious wounds, fainting and then waking up, all of this caused his mood to go from shaking to peaceful. In the beginning he was filled with anticipation, the desire for victory, only to have his hopes dashed, he was left with only the desire to wound the enemies, finally he was forced to focus on only one thing, to exclude all other thoughts and not think about victory. He stood dazedly inside the formation, motionless like a statue. On the top of the main peak, the battle between Wei Sheng and Gu Rongping was still ongoing. Wei Sheng's vision was a sea of blood, blurred. There were countless sword wounds on his body, the bleeding was dyeing his clothing. His features were blurred. He looked as though he was a person made from blood. Many in the audience that were watching almost couldn't bear to keep watching at this time. Even Tian Songzi hadn't resisted coming over, and asking if he should stop the battle. Pei Yuanran did not stop the fight. But he didn't realize that inside his tight fist, his fingernails had deeply cut into the flesh. Gu Rongping wasn't in good shape either. There were 3 sword cuts on his body. The 3 sword cuts were not deep, but the fresh blood had dyed a patch on his chest. His sword essence was still as free and traceless as before, but the audience could easily detect his exhaustion. No one would feel that Gu Rongping didn't have enough power. After fighting so hard for such a long period of time, exhaustion was an extremely normal state. Gu Rongping knew his own situation was worsening as time flowed, but he had no solution. 2 hours ago, Wei Sheng had been covered in wounds, almost wavering. But after 2 hours, Wei Sheng was still persisting. He seemed as though he could collapse at any moment, but he did not. Every time, Gu Rongping would feel that if he just put in a bit more power, he could defeat Wei Sheng, but after he put in the power, he found that, other than leaving behind a sword mark on the other's body, he didn't accomplish anything. Wei Sheng still endured. He hadn't managed to wait for Wei Sheng to collapse, yet Gu Rongping found that he had sunk into a dilemma without being aware of it. The 3 sword marks on his body were the proof. His sword scripture was like unspun silk from a cocoon, setting up a large web to snare the other, and then slowly wear away at the strength of his opponent, to let them lose all room to breathe and die. He had successfully pinned down his opponent, but his opponent had not stopped struggling. The 2 sides entered a standoff. The other's hardiness had far surpassed his expectations. His Ling power had quickly been consumed. His sword energies had slowly lost their edge. His movement started to become slower. The other had caught onto his weakness and counterattacked. The longer he fought, the heavier the terror in Gu Rongping's heart grew. Wei Sheng was like a wild beast that did not know exhaustion, like a seal soldier that did not have life, and did not know pain. When the sword energy flashed past his body, other than a muffled grunt, other than seeing the spray of blood, there was no other observable signs that he was affected. The fight between the hunter and the wild beast, the hunter was gradually losing the advantage. Zhuo Mo's formation belt allowed people to see a spectacle, and made people feel surprise. Wei Sheng and Gu Rongping's battle made people feel awe that came deep from their hearts. Time slowly slipped by. The sound of discussion became increasingly quieter. Even more people felt they were unable to keep watching. Seeing a person entirely covered in blood, fighting without a sound as he struggled painstakingly, and flying through the air as his figure wavered. The blood that was flowing down his body flung into the air. No one was in the mood to speak. Even though Wei Sheng had not won, but in everyone's eyes there was only his blood-covered figure. The battle inside the Great Pine Pavilion was still continuing. The Sky Ring Moon Chime formation had attracted the majority of the experts. Many people had cheered as they assumed their chances of entering the top 10 would increase. However, the developments were completely the opposite of what they imagined. Without the pressure of the experts, many shoujo that had decided to hide themselves did not have pressure and lost their patience. They did not hide in the corners any longer. The combat became even more fierce. However, no one dared to near Sky Ring Moon Chime formation, and no one dared to near the main peak. The Sky Ring Moon Chime formation was like a mysterious beast, its bloody maw wide open. No one knew the situation inside it. The fierce fight on top of the main peak made many shoujo inside the Great Pine Pavilion feel terror, deep terror. Even the judges in the Great Pine Pavilion put their attentions on those two places, and wished all the other fights would instantly finish. Xuemo felt that he seemed to have dropped into an enormous grey bubble. All around him was full of a strange grey material. Even though he was wearing Ling armor, but the Ling armor did not separate him from the grey matter. He seemed to be swimming naked. It didn't seem warm, but it wasn't cold. It was a strange sensation. The only feeling he could describe was familiar. He seemed to be very familiar with this grey material. What was this grey material? He seemed to understand everything, but did not understand anything at all. He reached out to grab, but didn't catch anything. Where was this? What was it? He felt that he should know, but no matter how he thought, he could not remember. He was slightly stunned. The surroundings did not provide any hints to him. His only clue was the feeling of familiarity. What really was this? Xuemo couldn't help furrowing his brows as he started to think deeply. He felt that he needed to find the answer. He reflexively reached and grasped at the grey material. Same as last time, he didn't grasp anything. This material was like air, invisible and intangible. Xuemo thought inside. Wait, invisible and intangible. Xuemo suddenly jumped. He knew what this was. Consciousness. This was consciousness. The moment he told himself this was consciousness, the feeling of familiarity inside his body instantly grew stronger. At the same time, the scenery around him suddenly changed. Below him, there was a place that looked like a little island far away. There was a patch of flame on the little island, countless crimson flames dancing. A gravestone, and a male wearing black sitting on top. There was also a ruler-straight river. The river was very muddled, with two kinds of colors that could barely be made out. Sea of Consciousness. This was the Sea of Consciousness. Xuemo was very shocked when he saw Puyao on top of the gravestone. He couldn't help but shout, but no matter how hard he tried to shout, Puyao did not hear him. He had to give up, and started to scan the surroundings. The entire Sea of Consciousness was surrounded by this grey material. This was completely different than what Xuemo had thought before. In the Sea of Consciousness, in his memories, what he saw in the surroundings was a pitch-black void, without anything but the stars in the sky. Right. He remembered that there were 4 stars in the void. As expected, when he raised his head to look up, he saw the stars. There were 4 stars in the sky. One of them was the brightest, the other 3 slightly duller. Before, every time he entered the Sea of Consciousness, he felt the 4 stars were very distant. At this time, he found that the 4 stars were like 4 little boats, floating on the outside of the consciousness. He seemed to have comprehended something. At this time, the 4 stars suddenly started to shed starlight. The starlight was like silver sand, slowly absorbed into the grey consciousness. But the grey consciousness was too big. That bit of starlight was pitifully small. But the 4 stars continuously poured down starlight at a slow pace. Xuemo didn't know what was the use of these silver-grained starlight, but clearly, his consciousness seemed to be starting a kind of transformation. Wei Fei and Wuling Sanren were absorbed in a fight between Wei Sheng and Gu Rongping. Not just them, but all of the judges in the Great Pine Pavilion were watching this tragic fight. Suddenly, Wuling Sanren seemed to have detected something, and turned his face. He unconsciously looked at the large formation under his feet. Just one look, and his gaze was stuck. Inside the formation, Xuemo's arms were spread open like he was going to embrace something. He was woodenly standing on the spot, his eyes empty and lifeless. Around him, the air seemed like burning firewood, occasionally producing soft explosions. Chapter 152, Stardust. The explosions around Xuemo became even dense. With the naked eye, it was possible to see the air continuously exploding, and producing small whirlpools. Wu-Ling Sanren was skilled in formations, because of this his consciousness was strong. Yet he found when his consciousness was one zhang away from Zuo, it seemed to have touched a wall that he could not penetrate. He made a sound of surprise. He was in the stage of Jindan. Zuo was just in Juji. Theoretically, Zuo's consciousness was not something that could resist his own. But the present situation was he was blocked. This kind of situation usually happened only when both sides were similar in power. He quickly calmed down from his surprise. He guessed that Zuo's consciousness was undergoing a transformation. The explosions around Zuo made him even more certain of his prediction. Compared to Ling power, Xianxia understood much less about the spirit. Even Jindan Xianxia like Wu-Ling Sanren wouldn't dare to say they had a good understanding of the spirit. On the market, there were countless jade scrolls on cultivating Ling power, but the number of jade scrolls for cultivating spiritual power were pitifully small, and they were not in demand. It was the most unpopular of the unpopular. In all the Xianxia, most of those skilled in the spirit were formation Xiao, but even formation Xiao still primarily used Ling power. It was like the Diana. They called themselves the greatest at body cultivation, but in reality, they still cultivated Ling power primarily. Wu-Ling Sanren might be skilled in formations, but he wasn't a formation Xiao, but a sword Xiao. In such a backwater little Jia like Sky Moon Jia dominated by sword Xiao, how was it possible to find good scriptures for cultivating the spirit? Wu-Ling Sanren's spirit scripture was a small branch of his sect's scripture. Due to that, he became interested in formations, and cultivated it for a while. But, that was just his hobby. A sword Xiao could only have one job, that was, to cultivate the sword. Wu-Ling Sanren did not know what was really happening in Zuo's spirit. Wei Fei, who had been alarmed by Wu-Ling Sanren's sound, looked at Zuo once before he took away his gaze. He was also a Jindan and naturally could see that a transformation was taking place in Zuo's consciousness. But in his view, the spirit was not the true path. So what if one's spirit was powerful? Wu-Ling Sanren thought for a while. Not being able to come to any answers, he turned his eyes back to Wei Sheng and Gu Rongping. Zuo felt his consciousness silently start to change as the starlight penetrated, but what change was it? Looking at the starlight continuously produced by the stars slowly spread out in his consciousness, he had a feeling that this transformation would continue for a time. The speed that the starlight spread was very slow. If it needed to spread through all of the area that the consciousness occupied, the time needed was not short. His gaze leaving the consciousness, he started to ponder the consciousness splitting that Pu Yao told him. In front of him, the consciousness was so clear. This was the first time that he had seen his consciousness. He didn't know if this was an illusion, or his own delusion. He felt it was hard to decipher, so he didn't think about it. Because the consciousness was so close he could almost touch it, he naturally thought about consciousness splitting. Pu Yao did not tell him how to separate the consciousness. Zuo looked at the surroundings. All around him was the consciousness, like the endless gray matter. The sea of consciousness was enveloped at the very center of the consciousness. The stars floated on the outside of the consciousness. It was so large, yet shapeless and intangible. Zuo didn't know what to do. He tried to communicate with the surrounding consciousness like he usually did. The moment he thought, the gray consciousness around him started to flood towards him. A short while later, there was a ball of consciousness on his hand. Zuo was joyful. It was this easy. But before he could be happy for a while, the ball of consciousness on his hand disappeared. As expected, it wouldn't be so simple. He wasn't demotivated. He was not surprised at the result. Since the first time he heard the words, consciousness splitting, he felt it wouldn't be so simple. After that, he tried all kinds of experiments and concluded many things. It was true that he could control the consciousness here, and it was very easy to control. But the consciousness was like sand. It could easily be squeezed into a ball in the hand, but once he let go, it would collapse into a pile. Once Sua Mo's thought moved away, the consciousness would return to its original state. Sua Mo felt that it was not correct. In his understanding, the consciousness that was separated should have a certain initiative of its own. Otherwise, what would be the difference compared to him separating his consciousness into separate parts? The consciousness was shapeless and intangible, and so it could be manipulated into any shape. When he was using the Great Leaf Fire formation to fight against Zhong Ming Yan, Sua Mo had used a similar technique. At the time, he needed to control Dragon Tying formation, Leaf Fire formation, Three-Turn formation, and Great Leaf Fire formation at the same time. In order to control all four formations, Sua Mo's skill with the consciousness had reached an extremely detailed level. At that time, his consciousness had been like an octopus with 4 tentacles which he used to control the 4 formations at the same time. From a technical viewpoint, that wasn't truly controlling them simultaneously because there was an order to the formations. It could be more appropriate to say it was cooperation. It was just that the gap between the times that the 4 formations were used that it looked as though it had proceeded at the same time. Controlling 4 formations at the same time, that was Sua Mo's limit. It wasn't multitasking with the mind, but making 4 continuous steps seamlessly. Consciousness splitting was truly multitasking. It could do many things at the same time. If that was true, then other than the consciousness, what also had to split apart was the mind. Sua Mo sunk into thought. The consciousness might be shapeless and intangible, but it was like Ling power, yet it could be separated. The mind was the thoughts of a person, how to split that? That was not possible. Sua Mo understood his own pathway was definitely wrong. He suddenly thought about the Yao seed in his body. The moment the thought appeared in his mind, the scenery around him changed again. The sea of consciousness was quickly pulled closer. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in the sea of consciousness. Pu Yao was nearby. Sua Mo saw Pu Yao suddenly open his eye and scan the surroundings. Then a puzzled expression appeared on his face. Sua Mo didn't have the time to call Pu Yao before his body passed through the flames and was pulled under below the sea of consciousness. And then, he saw the Yao seed. Only now did he know that the Yao seed was actually hidden away in his sea of consciousness, and in the very center at that. Sua Mo suddenly started to admire Pu Yao. To be able to bury an item like this into the deepest part of the sea of consciousness, Pu Yao was quite powerful. He had always assumed that the sea of consciousness was a small island, but now, he found it was actually a sphere. The place he usually went to was the surface of the sphere, and the inside of the sphere was empty. The Yao seed was in the very center, approximately the size of a walnut. Around it, there were many narrow tubes similar to channels or vines. Sua Mo couldn't name them. These slim tubes connected the Yao seed to the surface of the sea of consciousness. The Yao seed had been added later. Then these thin tubes should also have been added later. After he had obtained the Yao seed, his control of the consciousness had grown dramatically. Sua Mo guessed that it was caused by these things. Looking at the Yao seed covered with vine-like tubes, he fell into a daze. His heart suddenly moved. If he copied the structure of the Yao seed, could he stabilize the consciousness, rather than have it move like sand? The more he thought, the more he felt it was possible. Thinking hard about it, he discovered the consciousness, though shapeless and intangible, did not dissipate because of the existence of the sea of consciousness. The Yao seed allowed him to control the consciousness ever more closely to his wishes. Seeing a ray of light, Sua Mo quickly found himself facing another question. Then what could he use in place of the sea of consciousness, and what about the Yao seed? He didn't have Pu Yao's abilities. It was clearly impossible for him to take things in from the outside world. Only things already present could be used here. Looking at the Yao seed in front of him, he couldn't help but think that if this Yao seed was really like a vine, it would be wonderful if it could bear fruit. That way, he wouldn't be lacking for objects to use. This absurd thought just flashed humorously through his mind. He felt that his thinking should have been incorrect, but he needed to find a solution. He started to wander through the sea of consciousness, searching for items that could be the core. It was strange. He could clearly see Puyao, but the two of them seemed to be in completely different worlds. No matter how hard he shouted, even passing in front of the other, Puyao did not feel it at all. After trying a few times, he gave up on this useless action, and started to search for things that could replace the Yao seed. Yet, after he went through all of the sea of consciousness, he didn't find anything. Was this thinking wrong? He unconsciously floated back into the consciousness, feeling the sense of familiarity pass through the consciousness. He furrowed his brows as he thought. Just at this time, a speck of glittering starlight like silver sand slowly floated past his eyes. His eyes suddenly stopped. That bit of starlight actually had gathered a thin layer of consciousness, as though it had a thin gray shield. Glee suddenly came into Zhuomo's eyes. Starlight. Right, how could he have forgotten starlight? He carefully reached out with his hand to grab that speck of starlight. The speck had no weight in his hand, but he could feel even the thin layer of consciousness around the starlight even more clearly. This layer of consciousness was slightly denser than the consciousness of any other place. Ha! This was it. Zhuomo decided to call this star dust. Because when he looked at it closely, it wasn't a ball of light, but something tangible, like sand. Having found the miraculous use of stardust, Zhuomo started to squat next to the 4 stars to gather stardust. The speed the 4 stars sprayed out stardust was not fast. After a long time, Zhuomo only gathered a small handful. He decided to first try using the amount of star dust he had. The stardust was as loose as sand. If he wanted to use them as the inner core, he needed to forge them into one object. Forging was not unfamiliar to Zhuomo. Right now, he could be considered half an expert in controlling fire. He quickly became depressed because he could not summon the stalagmite fire. Without fire, wasn't it a dream to forge them together? Fire. His gaze couldn't help but land on the sea of consciousness. That was a large patch of fire. Maybe he could use those crimson fires, Zhuomo thought uncertainly. But at this time, he didn't have a better choice, so he could only try. Yet what he didn't expect was, when the thought just appeared, a strand of fire left the sea of flames, and flew in front of him. It was so smooth Zhuomo was awestruck. He had never been able to control the flames in the sea of consciousness before. But after thinking for a while, he couldn't think of a cause. In any case, its effectiveness would be known once he tried. Daringly, he took control of this strand of deep crimson fire, and started to forge the stardust in his hands. The deep red flame, carrying a fraction of black, covered the stardust, twisting about like a belly dancer. Chapter 153 Soul-tethered talisman. A bean-sized bead appeared on Zhuomo's hand, giving off a soft and warm star-like glow. The bead was spherical, flawlessly spherical, and very light. A thick layer of gray consciousness covered it, which made its glow appear dimmer. Zhuomo knew that he was halfway there. In reality, he felt his present situation was extremely weird. Everything in front of him was weird. There were so many wondrous aspects that could not be described, too many things that he could not understand. But so what? He actually hoped that this situation would continue for a bit longer. Please don't be a dream. It was a fleeting thought. He stopped thinking about the weirdness it anymore. This perfect bead that was forged out of stardust, Zhuomo called it the star bead. The star bead could automatically attract consciousness, but it still wasn't enough. If the gigantic gray ball that Zhuomo was on was his entire consciousness, then the amount of consciousness that the star bead attracted was so little it was insignificant. That little minuscule bit of consciousness lacked real value. Luckily, he could control the consciousness. He started to urge the consciousness to gather at the star bead and condense. No one paid any attention to Zuo. Even Wuling Sanren had his attention on Wei Sheng and Gu Rongping. The battle between the two had reached the decisive moment. Wei Sheng was covered in blood, and there were 3 more sword wounds on Gu Rongping's body. To say nothing of talent, just purely based on pain tolerance, Gu Rongping fell far behind Wei Sheng. Even Gu Rongping had to admit it to himself. What sort of monster was this guy in front of him? No matter what movement he made, it would pull on his wounds. That heart-boring pain almost brought him to tears. Fresh blood continuously flowed out of the wounds. He could clearly feel the power in his body slowly diminish due to blood loss. His head started to ring, his vision gradually became blurry, his Ling power was almost depleted, his channels were wounded. But how come this guy in front of him, who was far more injured than him, still hadn't fallen down? Wei Sheng had many more wounds than him, but why didn't he seem to be affected? Wei Sheng was flooded in blood, so much that he was suspicious that the others had been bleed dry. Why was he still persisting? Wei Sheng's cultivation was much lower than his. It should have long been used up. His channels should have been damaged a long time ago. But why? Looking at the bloody figure in front of him, helplessness and hopelessness suddenly creeped into Gu Rongping's heart. The air around Zuomo's body gradually calmed. The sounds of explosions became rarer, until it reached a complete silence. If one was watching, they would have found that the air around Zuomo's body had went from one extreme to another. There was no longer any explosions, no flow of air, nothing. The area one zhang around his body was so silent it seemed to be tangible, with no movement in the air at all. But no one noticed. Wuling Sanren and Wei Fei were completely concentrated on the battle between Wei Sheng and Gu Rongping. The few people that were fighting viciously in the formation also did not detect it. Zuo was forced to stop. Floating in front of him was a ball of black-gray consciousness the size of a bamboo basket. This was Zuomo's result. After continuously condensing, this consciousness ball had the star bead as the inner core. As expected, the outer layer of consciousness did not dissipate. He had taken out about 1/10 of his consciousness, and condensed it into this basket-sized ball of consciousness. The density of the consciousness ball had reached its limit, and was unable to be compressed any further. Due to the density, it was not like a ball of air, but was rock solid. Naturally, the star ball at the center could not be seen. So was it complete? Zuo was not certain. He had made the object but he didn't have any idea how to use it. Pu Yao had just described the concept. It was a pity that he was unable to communicate with Pu Yao. He had a strong feeling that if he left this wonderful state right now, it would definitely be hard to ever enter this wondrous state again. How was he to use it? Looking at the black-gray rock ball of consciousness, Zuo was in a predicament. He could feel that there was a certain connection between himself and the ball of consciousness, as though it was a part of his body. Zuomo's heart moved, and the ball of consciousness suddenly started to circle and dance around him. So interesting. Zuo instantly became interested. He didn't need to exert any control. Where his thoughts directed, the ball of consciousness would move. It was very fun. Zuo had never felt so great. Even the little art of cloud and rain, that he was most familiar with, he could not cast and maintain it so effortlessly without thought. The familiarity could not compare to this feeling that the ball was a part of him. He joyfully played around. Anything that he could think of, the ball of consciousness would usually be able to accomplish it. But quickly, he found something worth noting. The air-like consciousness seemed to reject the ball of consciousness. A natural empty space would form around the ball of consciousness. Zuo couldn't help but frown. The consciousness and the ball of consciousness was from the same origins, why would they repel each other? Pu Yao had never told him that the divided consciousness and the original consciousness would repel each other. Did he do something wrong? Just as he was uncertain of what to do, he suddenly had an extremely daring idea. Why not try and place the ball of consciousness into a talisman? 1. Since the ball of consciousness and his consciousness repelled each other, then he would find the ball of consciousness another place. Additionally, the ball of consciousness felt intimately connected to him, and if it happened to be in a talisman, just think how great it would be. If a talisman could act according to his thoughts, and turn into a part of his body. The more Zhuo thought, the more appealing he found the idea. Because the ball of consciousness was connected to his mind, he was able to understand that the ball of consciousness did not seem to disagree with his idea. So he did it. Zhuo started to calculate which talisman was suitable. Very quickly, he found a suitable talisman, 5-colored pagoda. He didn't have many talismans in the first place and naturally didn't have many to pick from. The inside of the 5-colored pagoda was a small pocket space which could take in the ball of consciousness. The 5-colored pagoda may be able to deconstruct ordinary materials into the 5 elemental essences, but consciousness was not one of the 5 elements. Therefore he did not have to worry about the ball being processed. In his perspective, the 5-colored pagoda might only be half completed, but of all the talismans he possessed, it had the greatest potential to grow and the greatest abilities. The moment he finished the thought, the ball of consciousness in front of him disappeared. Immediately after, Zhuo could feel that it was now positioned in an area filled with essence of the 5 elements. It was inside the 5-colored pagoda. Zhuo was gleeful. At the same moment, a blinding 5-colored light suddenly lit up the formation. The 4 people fighting inside the formation, and Changheng who had been watching the rings of light, all stopped and raised their heads in shock. A 5-colored pagoda appeared above the formation, releasing 5 colors of light that was both strong and beautiful. It was so eye-catching that the crescent moon above the 5-colored pagoda seemed to have lost all color. As the 5-colored pagoda rose out of the clouds, light streamed like a sunrise. The exterior of the 5-colored pagoda that was covered by the 5-colored light had changed greatly. There was a glass-like sheen on the body of the tower, glistening and clear. The colors of each of the 5 different levels was even more clean and fine. The eaves of the tower curved at a great angle, looking like flying eaves. The body of the tower was narrower and taller than before, the top of the tower seemed sharp. The sudden surge of light alarmed everyone. Soul-tethered talisman. Xianxia was the first to react. A light suddenly rose in his eyes, his voice full of excitement. The other 3 dazedly stared at that exquisite 5-colored pagoda in the mirage. The light that it produced, every detail, it all displayed just how unordinary it was. After a while, the other 3 managed to react. Pei Yuanran was the first to turn around his face to look at Xianxia. It really is a soul-tethered talisman. The disciples behind them stared at each other. They were able to hear the excitement and nervousness in the sect leader's voice. They couldn't help but be curious. What was a soul-tethered talisman? Was it worth Xianxia Shishu and the sect leader to be so excited? Definitely. Xianxia replied resolutely. An uncontrollable joy floated onto the other 3 people's face, unable to be disguised. Xianxia was skilled in forging, and never over-exaggerated. If he was so certain, then it definitely wouldn't be wrong. Soul-tethered talisman. Zhuo actually had a soul-tethered talisman. If Xianxia was able to realize this, then other people naturally could also see it. Surprise and shock made their way onto many people's faces. A soul-tethered talisman was a talisman that was intimately connected to a xiuzhi. This kind of talisman was extremely rare. The power of a soul-tethered talisman far surpassed normal talismans, and it had many qualities that made people drool. It was able to become stronger as the xiuzhi increased in cultivation. It was connected to the mind of its owner, so they could use it to the greatest effect. The meaning of soul-tethered was akin to being a part of the cultivator, so they did not have to worry about the talisman being stolen by others. Even if a soul-tethered talisman was stolen, the thief would not be able to use it. It was bound to the Xianxia, that was why it was called a soul-tethered talisman. Who would cut off someone else's hand, and then connect it to their body? A soul-tethered talisman was the highest kind of talisman all cultivators dreamed about. It was strange, but no one was able to forge a soul-tethered talisman. They usually were formed through great treasures which underwent some fortuitous occurrences. Up until now, no one was able to clearly describe the factors for the formation of a soul-tethered talisman. While there were many benefits to the soul-tethered talisman, it wasn't as though there were no disadvantages. Due to the great intimacy between the talisman and the Xianxia, if the soul-tethered talisman was damaged, the cultivator would also be affected. Usually, soul-tethered talismans were also called life-saving talismans. Those that possessed one used one scarcely and carefully. No one would have thought that a Zhuji would possess a soul-tethered talisman. People envied Suomo's luck. As the five-colored pagoda transformed and appeared, the completed 72-child formation, sky ring moon chime formation, also changed. The light released by the five-colored pagoda gradually disappeared. At the same time, the crescent moon in the sky turned to a full moon, becoming even brighter and clean as it hung up in the sky. The full moon was like a wheel, countless moon-colored strands silently drifted down from the full moon. The moon-colored thin strands seemed to flutter in the wind on the other end, quietly moving through the air and passing through the freely swimming rings of light. In the blink of an eye, the light rings of various sizes had been threaded through by the moon-colored strands into bunches similar to wind chimes. The light of the full moon brightened. The thin strands that fell down shook, and all the rings of light shook, countless rings chiming at the same time. Ding! The clear sound traveled through the enormous great pine pavilion, able to be heard at every corner. The sky ring moon chime formation had been reborn. Chapter 154 Moon Chime Soundstorm. Thousands of rings of light were chiming all at once. To the ears of everyone watching it was unspeakably clear and pleasurable, but the expressions of the five people inside the formation changed. Even Changhen, who was usually stoic, narrowed his eyes instinctively. He unhesitatingly reached towards the copper ring between his collarbones and took out the bloody spider sword. He glanced at the others in the formation. Everyone acted as though they were facing a great enemy. Even the yellow-faced man that had been steadily overpowering him previously, had a serious expression as he held the copper dagger axe in front of his chest. When that clear chime from the rings of light had sounded out, the Ling power in their bodies shook, their energies became unsteady. Just a chime from the rings of light was so strong. The five people instantly became nervous. Even the stupidest person understood now that the great formation in front of them had changed. The full moon shone in the sky. The moon-colored strands were like hair, soft and powerless, weaved in with the rings of light and ringing of wind chimes. The scene was a beautiful painting. Such a beautiful scene, yet there was no admiration from the five people inside it. In their eyes, the formation was powerful and full of murderous intent. Behind the black gauze, Su could not keep her composure, her face full of shock. Such a formation, such a display, was it really something a Zhuji Xianxia could complete? That image of a wretched, greedy, and soft rice-eating zombie in her head was completely destroyed. Behind that expressionless face, there seemed to be a long shadow, deep and hard to predict. Had she been wrong in her impression of Suomo from the beginning? There were thousands rings of light on the moon strings. They slowly swayed, elegant and soft. Tightly focusing on the moon strands and light rings in front of her, Su's gaze seemed to be deeply attracted to them, and she was unable to move her eyes away. The rings of light gently trembled, and little slivers of killing intent slowly permeated, silently taking over every bit of space. Her mouth was slightly dry. She had always wondered why Suomo hadn't sent out the paper crane. She understood now. Suomo didn't need her help at all. But at this time, her body was tense, not daring to slack off the tiniest bit. Her gaze still didn't move. The sword scripture that she practiced belonged to the area of magnetism. Magnetic power was extremely good for detection. These tiny bits of killing intent appeared as non-threatening, but in reality, they could gather together at any time and kill. Yet what truly made her on her guard, and more nervous than ever, was that she was their target. Why? Why would she also be an enemy? Sue couldn't understand, but there was no time for her to think. She could only prepare for battle. She had a strong feeling that once the big formation was activated, it wouldn't be so relaxing. Wuling Sanren and Wei Fei's expressions were heavy. Wei Fei stared down and asked solemnly, "Sanren, do you recognize this formation?" Wuling Sanren shook his head. "No, but this formation should be 4th grade. However, it must be that soul-tethered talismans that he just got which makes it so powerful." He nervously stared at the formation below him, eyes unwavering. He had to admit he had made a wrong judgment. Before, he had only felt Suemo had some talent, but his skill with formations was in the range of normality, but looking at it now, the formation that guy had set up was far beyond his cultivation stage. If it was only that, he would have just been slightly surprised. What really shocked him was that this guy had a soul-tethered talisman. Truly a fortunate guy. He couldn't help but be envious. His cultivation was multiple times higher than Zuemo, but he didn't have a soul-tethered talisman. He was not the only one that was green-eyed over Zuemo's soul-tethered talisman. Wei Fei also sighed over the unfairness of the heavens. However, they knew that soul-tethered talismans could not be planned for. Both were also Jindan experts, the strength of their mind extremely resolute, and did not move so easily for an outside object. The two of them quickly returned to normal. What does he want to do? Wei Fei's brows furrowed as he snorted coldly. Does he want to fight 1 against 5? Has a soul-tethered talisman, so he doesn't even know where his limits are. Wuling Sanren didn't speak. After continuously making mistaken judgments, he felt the less he said, the better. Also, based on the grave presence of the formation below, Zuemo may not be brash. What he really could not see clearly was Zuemo's present situation. Inside the formation, Zuemo still maintained his weird posture, his eyes empty. The air around him seemed to be like glue, motionless. If one looked closely, they would find that the rings of light near him were affected by an invisible force that pushed them away. The abnormalities had started when Zuemo had entered this strange state. Wuling Sanren didn't have any confidence. The 5-colored pagoda floated in the sky above the pond. On the sword-sharp point, there was a dot of star light that flashed, communicating with the full moon in the sky. The moon dimmed and brightened. Clink 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 clink. Suddenly, the light rings on the moon strings started to shake. The small chimes were like a tide, spreading out in waves. The 5 people inside the formation stiffened as the tension rose. At this time, they did not have the attention to spare to fight with other people because, to their shock, they discovered that Zuemo did not plan on letting even one of them escape from the formation escape. TSK. Unlucky. Luoli felt helpless. Zuemo went crazy again. The flying sword floated beside him, waiting to attack. He said those words, but light came into his eyes, and slight anticipation rose. There was quite a period of time since the last time they had fought. He always had the thought of trying to fight Zuemo again, but he had never found the chance. Now that the opportunity was right in front of him, the desire for battle burned in his heart. In Luo Li's mind, Zuemo and Wei Sheng were all geniuses of the sect. Wei Sheng Xixiang was like a mountain peak unable to be scaled. Facing Xixiang, one would only feel hopelessness. Zuemo was completely different. If one saw him usually, one would always accidentally underestimate and disdain him. But when one truly faced him, he might not win, but he definitely would surprise and shock others. Gue Feng also detected the thick killing intent in the formation. He didn't use the ghost movement to hide his figure like usual. The entire formation was under the control of the other. The effect of the ghost movement was limited. His expression was grave. 2 blooms of bright green ghost fire burned on the white bone sword. The body of the sword hummed like the soft sobs of souls. Suemo still hadn't left that wondrous state. This state made people intoxicated, a state where anything was possible, as though everything was understood. He silently stood there as though he was a spectator, watching everything that was happening in front of him. The 5-colored pagoda whose thoughts were connected to his was stand guard in the center of the great formation, controlling the entire sky ring moon chime formation. Every detail of the sky ring moon chime formation flowed across his heart. He couldn't see it, but he could clearly feel it. It was passed on from the 5-colored pagoda. Before, his original intentions had been to activate and use the 72-child formation sky ring moon chime formation in order to gain some experience, and to comprehend some of the intricacies of the sky ring moon chime formation. Right now, every detail of the sky ring moon chime formation was in front of him. Due to this, he decided he would try the power of the sky ring moon chime formation. His thoughts moved, and the 5-colored pagoda activated the great formation. The fine chimes that had like a tide suddenly disappeared. The enormous formation suddenly sank into a dead silence, suffocating like a rock pressed to the chest. The 5 people tensed to their limits inside the formation. This suffocating and heavy silence was the prelude to the killing. The round moon suddenly lit up, emanating the brightest and strongest light it could without any regard. In the blink of an eye, the round moon which had been as clean as jade seemed to have started to burn, the strong light making it appear like a ball of fire. Clink. A ring of light that was the closest to the full moon gave a clear sound. This clear sound announced the beginning of the killing move. There seemed to be some force that was being passed down through the moon string. Like it was a relay, one by one, the rings of light sounded. Clink clink clink. The sounds went from slow to fast, the frequent chimes like a suddenly rising tide. Looking from the sky, the rings of light hanging off the strands coming of the moon were like dominoes being set off, one shaking after the previous. The shaking of the first ring of light was the least, and the sound was the lightest. The second ring of light vibrated more, and the sound was slightly louder. The third ring of light vibrated even greater in magnitude, the sound even louder. This cascade of changes was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, the power seemed to have passed to the end of the moon string, and to the last ring of light. The last ring of light on each moon strand lit up at the same time. After the power from the preceding rings of light finally reached the last ring of light, the chiming of the ring of light had reached a maximum. Clang! The 5 people inside the formation felt their vision blur. Everything they saw seemed to twist and change. The ground underneath their feet shook violently, almost knocking them off their feet. All of their expressions changed. Sue's Black Day's sword was held across her chest, her right hand holding the hilt of the sword, her left hand straight like a sword, pressing gently on the body of the sword. She shouted clearly, "Protect." With her as the center, a terrifying magnetic force exploded into the surroundings. Luo Li didn't go grab the flying sword floating in front of him, but spread out his right hand, the palm open. His voice was ethereal, lonely and empty, self-separate. The ethereal sword essence was like a female ghost dancing by his side. Chang Heng's blood spider sword transformed into the blood spider, shielding him from the front. The blood light on the body of the blood spider was extremely bright, as though it had just been taken out of a blood pond. The blood spider gave a vicious howl, ready to leap. At some time, a heavy copper armor appeared on the yellow-faced man. The thick armor covered his entire body, only revealing his eyes. His hand was holding the copper dagger axe flatly, his back straight as he bellowed, "Break!" A child appearing about 6 or 7 years old appeared in front of Gui Feng. He was very chubby, his skin tender. He was wearing a red bellycloth. However, his eyes were an eerie green. Gui Feng shouted, "Go!" Gui Feng's killing move, Little Ghost King. The 5 people simultaneously used their killing moves. They could feel a strong threat. The activation of the Sky Ring Moon Chime formation did not have any forewarning. Once it started, it activated its strongest attack. Inside the formation, the lion-headed copper cauldrons that Suemo used to set up the leaf fire formation collapsed into dust, the metal nails turned to dust, the jade cards turned to dust, the plants turned to dust, the ground turned to dust. The half-moose-sized pond turned into a ball of fine mist. This was the initiation of the strongest killing move of the 72-child formation Sky Ring Moon Chime formation, Moon Chime Sound Storm. Chapter 155 Collision. Lin Qian silently stood in the air, looking at the enormous mirage in the distance. He could not see what was occurring inside the formation, but he was very shocked at the appearance of the 5-colored pagoda. Other people may not know the origins of the 5-colored pagoda, but he had seen Mo buying this talisman from the 100 Treasures Flying Pavilion. The 5-colored pagoda had some clever abilities, but it was just an incomplete talisman. In his eyes, it was not a good talisman and wouldn't have expected it to become a soul-tethered talisman. But what the 5-colored pagoda had just appeared was truly a soul-tethered talisman. Something definitely changed in this period of time. Just at this time, the mirage suddenly shook violently. The picture became indistinct, and nothing could be seen. The audience, which had been excited, instantly gasped. What had happened? Did the mirage illusion formation malfunction? Lin Qian was slightly surprised. The stability of the mirage illusion formation, that Tian Song Z setup, could not be doubted. Did something happen inside the Great Pine Pavilion? He was not the only person surprised. The person who felt the greatest surprise was Tian Song Z. To set up the mirage illusion formation, he had expended many resources. Seeing an unexpected occurrence happen, he couldn't help but frown. A sect leader was also puzzled. Technically, there shouldn't be a problem with the mirage illusion formation. Yes, of course. The other sect leaders opened in agreement. Mirage illusion formation was an extremely mature and stable formation, having been used since a long time ago. Other than the size, which was much larger than the average formation, there was nothing different about the formation that had been set up this time. The corner of Tian Song Z's eye suddenly jumped. Someone noticed his abnormality and asked, "Has friend found something?" Tian Song Z's expression was normal, and said with a smile, "A small accident." As expected, when he finished, the mirage quickly resumed. Everyone's attention was quickly attracted by the mirage. Shock slightly spilled out of Tian Song Z's eyes. The Great Pine Pavilion was a secret paradise talisman. It was always in the possession of each generation of Dong Fu Hall's master. Just now, he had detected an extremely strong Ling power ripple that had exploded suddenly in Great Pine Pavilion. It was that Ling power ripple which had affected the mirage illusion formation, and caused its situation. This burst of Ling power was like a meteor, and had flashed by and disappearing in a flash. His eyes went towards the formation belt inside the mirage. The location of the Ling power explosion was there. Who had caused the Ling power explosion? Suemo. Or someone else? He wasn't surprised that Yu Bai was eliminated, and he wasn't sad. There were many benefits to Yu Bai for having such an experience of real battle. As to everything else, he did not care. Maybe Yu Bai would care, but this was what Tian Song Z hoped he could encounter. Yu Bai might be respectful and warm usually, but in reality, he did not really know reality, and was overly proud. This proud aura was a trait of many young masters. It was the special aura that would appear most easily on the core disciples of each sect. Tian Song Z's eyes went towards the big formation. He couldn't help but admire Pei Yuan Ran. In Wukong's sword sect's disciples, other than Luo Li, who had a faint attitude of a young master, Wei Sheng and Zhua Mo did not carry themselves this way. These two young people were also the two with the most spectacular performance of this year's sword test conference. Moon Chime Sound Storm. Inside the formation, everything was pulverized to dust and thrown about. The dust and mist covered the entire formation, becoming even finer and smaller. Amidst the sky of dust, Zhuo Mo's arms was open like a divine being, motionless, his eyes indifferent and empty without a hint of emotion. Within a 1 zhang radius around Zhuo Mo the dust and mist were blocked by an invisible wall. The greatest killing move of the 72-child formation Sky Ring Moon Chime Formation shook the Great Pine Pavilion. Nothing could block the sounds that swept through the Great Pine Pavilion. Countless young beasts bled from their orifices and died. As the sound storm approached, all Xianxia felt their energies shake, their Ling power almost spinning out of control. All were shocked. That was the case for the Xianxia outside the formation. The pressure faced by the 5 people inside the formation was hundreds of times stronger. Su's fine brow was creased into a ball, showing a slightly pained expression. She had underestimated the power of the great formation. In the sound storm, the Ling power in her body had almost collapsed, and the magnetic shield had almost dissolved. She bit her teeth, not daring to keep anything back. All the Ling power inside her body channeled and flowed towards the Black Day's sword. The magnetic force twisted space, covering her, and turning her into a mirage. Luo Li's situation wasn't much better. Blood streamed out of the corner of his mouth. His cultivation was not as high as the other 4. After the attack, he was wounded. But the corner of his mouth went up rather than down, the desire for battle in his eyes increasing instead, furious, hot. Last time, I pushed you to such a sorry state, but you did not surrender. This time, you push me to such a sorry. How can I lose to you? His pupils suddenly expanded, the flying sword floating in front of his body hummed, its body shaking. Like a stream of light, it stabbed into the ground in front of his feet up to the hilt. He knelt down on one knee in front of the sword, muttering in a low voice, self-separation. Self-separation. Woli. Self-separation. It echoed around his body. The figure floating in front of his figure, which appeared like a female ghost, suddenly became clear. A plainly dressed female with her hair up stood. Her eyes were angry. She lightly sighed and raised her graceful wrist. A green and red light flew from her hand, blocking in front of the two of them. Chang Heng expressionlessly stood. The ground under his feet shattered. Even when they shattered into even smaller pieces of dust, he was not moved. In front of him, the blood spider seemed to be enraged, howling as the black seals across its entire body brightened. A bloody curtain of light, tinged slightly with black, blocked in front of the person and spider. The yellow-faced man wore heavy armor, holding a copper dagger axe, and shouted. A blinding light appeared at the tip of the copper dagger axe. It clearly was piercing emptiness, but it was like it was encountering great resistance. It slowly pierced further, each bit extremely difficult. The light of the dagger axe became even more bright, so bright one could not look at it. The little ghost king in front of Gui Feng spoke baby talk as he waved his tender lotus root-like hands. An eerie green curtain of light appeared layer by layer as he moved. The thin green curtains were as fragile as eggshell, breaking as soon as they formed. Gui Feng finally showed shock. The little ghost king seemed to have been provoked, not ing anymore. A vicious and cruel expression appeared on the innocent and adorable face. His hands started to dance, the movement strange. Each movement was filled with a dark and terrifying presence, like a sorcerer dancing. A eerie green belt of light appeared, quickly spinning around Gui Feng and the little ghost king. From the belt of light came sorrowful and angry sobs. The air that surrounded Zhuo Mo, who was in a wondrous state, suddenly rippled. That pair of indifferent and empty eyes moved, and became a fraction livelier. Zhuo Mo felt his body become gold. The pleasurable feeling from floating in the consciousness flew away. There was no gray, no starlight, no sea of consciousness. He moved his eyes. Above his head, a full moon hung, the moon strings plentiful as hair, the rings like wind chimes. The first thought in Zhuo Mo's mind was, not good. Why did he wake up at such a dangerous time? Before he could become irritated, he was bowled over by a large Yao beast that was charging at full speed. Splat, he spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. Like a sandbag, he was thrown into the air. The strongest attack of the 72 child formation Sky Ring Moon Chime Formation, Moon Chime Soundstorm, and the life-saving measures of Changhang and the other four crashed together without any technique. The strongest encounter in the sword test conference. Boom boom boom. The bright light was like the sun rising. The earth cracked, the sky changed color. The Sky Ring Moon Chime Formation could not endure the terrifying power from such an encounter and instantly crumbled. The pitiful Zhuo Mo. He had woken up at the most crucial time, his skill level dropping back to his normal level. How could he defend against the collision of these two forces? Luckily, the majority of the power was absorbed by the Sky Ring Moon Chime Formation, but Zhuo Mo still couldn't endure the rest. He instantly was seriously wounded. The light around the five-colored pagoda dimmed, cracks appearing on the body of the tower. With a tragic hum, it turned to a stream of light and flew into Zhuo Mo's body. Changhang and the others were not much better. The face-on collision of the two forces were far beyond their expectations. Before they were able to react, they were forcefully ejected from the formation several dozen zhang away. All five were injured. Each person had wounds, their faces full of shock. Even Changhang was not an exception. Through the mirage formation, the audience in Dongfu was unable to see the situation inside the Great Formation. The sudden blurring of the formation also made many people speculate. Just as everyone was puzzled, the mirage which had just recovered suddenly exploded with a blinding light. Not ready for the blinding flash, many people found their vision a sea of white, unable to see anything. Dongfu instantly turned to chaos. The panicked people instinctively protecting themselves. The enormous Dongfu exploded in shouts. The situation only calmed down after a while when everyone's eyes had recovered. The fearful people unconsciously looked towards the mirage that had just changed. Hiss. It was rare to see several 10,000s of people inhale in shock. On the mirage, the position where Zhuo Mo had originally set up the formation belt had completely transformed. The pond was gone, the woods were gone, the formation was gone. What they could see was an enormous great pit. The depth of the pit was far more than 10 zhang, its width reaching an astonishing 50 zhang. Such a terrifying pit made everyone feel cold in their hearts as they swallowed. Around the great hole, there were 15 great cracks that were wider than 5 zhang which snaked their way away from the big hole. The longest crack was 3 li in length. Even the shortest crack was 100 zhang. The black big hole was full of cracks, startling to the eye. It looked like an extremely ugly jellyfish. But anyone who saw this jellyfish would only feel fear and tremble. What kind of power could do this? The audience in Dongfu was left in shock. The Xianxia inside the Great Pine Pavilion were struck even more deeply. The moment the light appeared, that power which seemed to destroy the world made everyone feel the terror of death's approach. No one had any interest in fighting. Their hearts were filled with terror, yet their legs seemed to be enchanted as they ran towards the location of the light of their own initiative. When they saw the great hole, the last vestige of power seemed to leave them and they sat down beside the hole. At the gathering place of the Dongfu sect leaders, a voice full of anger and pain sounded. My great pine pavilion. Zhuo Mo immediately remembered that the person who had wounded Luo Li had been himself. That wondrous state had disappeared, but Zhuo Mo clearly remembered what had happened during that time. If Suomo's face could move, his expression right now would certainly be extremely unnatural. Due to the fact he had been in a strange state, he had performed beyond his abilities. Even if he was completely healed and set up the 72 child formation sky ring moon chime formation again, he might not be able to successfully perform moon chime soundstorm successfully 1 in 10 times. Is Xixiang better? Luo Li avoided Suomo's eyes and asked Wei Sheng. His mentality was much better than before. Even though Wei Sheng had once been his sword servant, but right now, he was Wukong's sword sect's eldest Xixiang. Greater power meant a greater status, the rules of the sect had always been so. Now, no one in Wukong's sword sect would doubt Wei Sheng Xixiang's strength. Facing Zuo, Luo Li still had some desire to compete, but facing Wei Sheng he had completely submitted. Much better. Wei Sheng's tone was nothing like that of a seriously wounded patient, extremely optimistic. After a bit of time, I'll probably heal. The three of them were all severely wounded, unable to move as they laid on the bed. At the beginning there was a slight barrier between Zuo and Luo Li, but now that they were in the same predicament, their relations gradually improved. After a while, they conversed freely. Before, Zuo hadn't liked Luo Li. Upon further acquaintance, he found that Luo Li was not as bad as he had imagined. Quite the opposite, in fact. Even though he would unconsciously reveal the pride ingrained in his bones, his personality was straightforward and he was a forthright person. The two of them had fought 2 times. Both times, each of them had been seriously wounded. To a certain degree, their relationship was forged in fighting. The two of them were also full of admiration towards each other's strength. Nothing needed to be said of Luo Li to Zuo. Right now, Zuo had become one of the hottest people in Dongfu. At the end, he had fought 1-on-5, and it had turned into a legend in Dongfu. No one had saw the 1-on-5 fight, but everyone had clearly seen the terrifyingly gigantic hole in the Great Pine Pavilion. Zuo knew how much his strength was really worth. Each time eldest Xixiang and Luo Li mentioned this matter, his heart was extremely insecure. In his perspective, Luo Li's strength was much stronger than his. Suddenly remembering this matter, Zuo couldn't help but ask in curiosity, Xixiang, that day, I seemed to see a woman in front of you, who was that? Luo Li was instantly slightly embarrassed. He muttered, that's my sword spirit. So Shidi is walking the road of spirit manifestation. Wei Sheng instantly realized. Seeing Zuo not understanding, and then remembering this guy did not study what he should be, he painstakingly explained. There are many ways to cultivate the sword, many of them strange. Sword spirit is one of these. It means to nurture the sword essence to mate it into a spirit. However, he couldn't help but glance at Luo Li several times. I really didn't see that Luo Xixiang's emotions are pretty sensitive. Seeing Zuo still not understanding, he said with a smile, people that cultivate a sword spirit mostly have sensitive feelings. This way of the sword uses emotion to enter this path of the sword. When the sword spirit is forming, it needs to use emotion as the guide for the sword spirit to take form. Zuo finally understood. Luo Li instantly blushed red. Our sect is a sword sect. Shidi must not slack off on the sword scriptures. Wei Sheng said to Zuo, aha. Zuo unconcernedly responded. He suddenly thought about the Kunlun Jade Scroll, and couldn't help but ask, this sword test conference, has the rankings come out? Who entered the top 10? Wei Sheng shook his head. Wounded like this, how can we know the situation outside? Zuo turned towards Luo Li. Luo Li also shook his head. Zuo could only say, I'll ask when Xiaoguo and the others come next time. These past few days, it had been Xiaoguo, Li Yingfeng and the others who had been looking after the three of them. The sect elders were not seen. The three of them didn't know the ranking for the sword test conference had become a great problem. Zuo's last move had disrupted the competition. Tian Songzi saw that the Great Pine Pavilion had been damaged to such a degree had instantly stopped the competition. No competitor had opposed the decision. Having seen the terrifying collision with their own eyes, they didn't have any more interest in competing. Many of the Xianxia that rushed to the explosion had been left shocked, dazed, and withered. What was even more unexpected was that the time those people spent with a low mood was much longer than others had imagined. Their elders started to become worried. From this, it could be seen just how much of a blow that world-shattering collision had given them. For Tian Songzi, who was hosting the sword test conference, there were more things that caused a headache for him. He could slowly fix the damage in the Great Pine Pavilion, but he must immediately solve the problem of the sword test conference's ranking. This was an extremely troublesome problem. Because the competition had been stopped in the middle, the number of people in the Great Pine Pavilion was far more than 10. These competitors were also all people of some strength. Wei Sheng and Gu Rongping had both been wounded and became unconscious. The other spectacular competitor, Zui Mo, also was seriously wounded and unconscious. It was not easy to rank the first 10. The reason that the 4 of Pei Yuan ran and the others were absent was due to this matter. Who could imagine a group of Jindan experts in a room shouting furiously like a group of children? Some slammed the table, others soared, some bounced back and forth. It was very boisterous. After Pei Yuan ran and the others left Dong Fu Hall, even if they were of astounding cultivation, there was tiredness on their faces. Su was lying on the bed. Even now, there was a layer of black gauze over her face. "Do you feel better today?" Lin Qian asked attentively. Su nodded and didn't speak. Lin Qian's expression was full of self-blame. He took out a jade bottle and said gently, "I didn't think you would be wounded this time. It is my fault. This youth Dan will be very beneficial for you. Consume it quickly." Su's body gently shook. Her gaze stared at the jade bottle in Lin Qian's hand. She had heard of the name Youth Dan. It was an extremely rare and expensive Ling Dan, especially suited for female Xiao to consume. It had great benefits for cultivation. Using it to heal, she felt it was a great waste. "Who really are you?" Su's gaze moved from the jade bottle to Lin Qian as she asked coldly. She had heard the name of the youth Dan, but she was also very clear about its rarity. Heart Lake Sword Sect might be the top-tier sect in Sky Moon Jia, but such a high-grade Lingdan such as Youth Dan wasn't something they could possess. She had always assumed that Lin Qian was a disciple of one of the elders, but when he took out the Youth Dan, she suddenly realized that Lin Qian definitely couldn't be a disciple of her sect. Then the other question was, where did the sect token in Lin Qian's hand come from? What goal did he have? Su's gaze was like an arrow. Lin Qian laughed lightly, his expression normal. He gently put the Youth Dan in front of Su. "I am not Shimi's enemy." He then asked, "The matter I asked last time, does Shimi have the result?" Seeing the calmness on Lin Qian's face, Su hesitated and shook her head, saying, "It's not him." Lin Qian did not seem surprised at this result. He nodded. "Many thanks, Shimi. Shimi, please relax and rest. As to forging your sword, you can give it to this one. I will not disappoint Shimi." Finishing, he left. Su looked at the figure that disappeared outside the door and felt this person was even more mysterious. In a distant mountain valley of Lingying's sect, there were 2 people speaking. It was Changheng and the yellow-faced man. The expressions of the 2 seemed untouched, but their complexion and alertness was much worse than before the competition. The 2 of them had not escaped unscathed. They had been wounded to various degrees. "This is what you need." The yellow-faced man handed over a jade scroll. Changheng took over the jade scroll. Without looking, he put it away. The yellow-faced man saw Changheng didn't move and said in satisfaction, "This is the first half. It's the deposit." After the matter is concluded, I'll give you the other half. I'll notify you of the general time. Changheng nodded and said expressionlessly, all right. Finishing, he turned and left. Chapter 157 Unexpected. When Zhuo Mo, Wei Sheng, and Luo Li saw the sect leader and the other Shishu, they instantly became obedient. Humph, you guys are very good. Went to attend a sword test conference and not one of you came back whole. Shifeng Rong, who had been working tirelessly, saw these three and her already bad mood became even worse. The responsibility to heal the three had all landed on her head. The three shook in fear. Shifeng Rong might be the youngest of the sect elders, but in reality, the outcome to having offended fourth Shigu was very bad. Pei Yuanran and the others did not have good complexions. Everyone that was dragged to Dong Fu Hall had to shout and sort out the mess. Naturally were not in good moods. Even more, these three disciples were seriously wounded. The expenses were very high. All right. Yan Lu came out to smooth things over. Really, you guys got yourselves into this state. As your elders, how can we not worry? You have to remember there is no meaning in one victory or defeat. As long as you are alive, you always have the chance to take it back. But if you don't have a life, what does victory mean? The three murmured. Pei Yuanran's expression relaxed slightly and took over. Your Shishu is right. You have to remember this. You are the hope of the sect. In the future, the prosperity of the sect rests on you. If you do not take care of your body, you will fail the teachings the sect has given you. Haha, but you guys were very good this time. The rankings for the sword test conference have been finalized. The situation was special, so the final rankings were calculated using the Jindan elders' judgment. All three of you are in the top 10. Wei Xing second, Zhuo Mo third, Luo Li seventh. Luo Li couldn't help ask, didn't we lose and were unconscious? Pei Yuanran narrated the situation after the sword test conference had ended before Wei Sheng and Luo Li understood. When they looked at Zhuo Mo, it was like they were looking at a monster. This guy was the true criminal for the ending of the competition. Zhuo Mo's head was dazed, his eyes was blank. Koenluan Introductory Formation Jade Scroll. He had given up hope on obtaining it for a long time now, but the sect leader was telling him that he was ranked third. This meant that the Jade Scroll was basically his. Who's first? Wei Xing asked. It's Gu Rongping. Pei Yuanran glanced at Wei Sheng. Afraid the other couldn't bear it, he explained, Gu Rongping's level might not be as high as you, but he suppressed you. If it really was truly a matter of life and death, the likelihood of him winning is bigger. In reality, he still had something he didn't say. Heart Lake Sword Sect was the first-ranked major sect in Sky Moon Jia, how could the others not give them some face? That's right. Wei Xing nodded, unconcerned. Gu Rongping really is the strongest opponent I encountered. I learned many things this time. Seeing Wei Xing's mind was so open, Pei Yuanran was very comforted. Luo Li wanted to speak when he suddenly saw Xian Xianxia stare with icy eyes at Zhuo Mo. He instantly didn't dare to speak. Did Xian Xianxia have some opinion about Zhuo Mo shitty? He was slightly puzzled. Rationally, Zhuo Shidi's performance this time could be labeled spectacular. Why wasn't Xian Xianxia satisfied? He peeked at Zhuo Mo and found the other's eyes were unfocused as though the other had wandered away. These few days, the three of them had grown their relationship. Luo Li couldn't help but panic on Zhuo Mo's behalf. He wanted to speak to remind him, but the words shrunk back when it came to his mouth. Xian Xianxia's gaze was really sharp, even sharper than a flying sword. Zhuo Mo gradually came out of his shock and instinctively asked, "What time can we get the prizes?" Once the words came out, the four elders stopped speaking, their faces becoming dark. Zhuo Mo finally came back to his body. Seeing the sect leader and others have faces blacker than the bottom of a pot, he shook. Not good. The four of them stared unkindly at Mo, causing him to have goosebumps. No one expected the first person to break the pressuring mood was Xianxia. However, once he opened, it was like the wind of the tundra sweeping through the room, the temperature freezing. Good. Very good. Extremely good. After 3, good, without another word, Xianxia turned and left. Pei Yuan ran and Yen Lu did not have good expressions. The two turned and left. Shi Fengrong's face was black. Her eyes looked as though she was going to skin Mo alive. Mo was very good at deciphering people's expressions. Seeing Master's expression, the bad feeling inside shot up, and he murmured, "Master, very good." Shi Fengrong snorted coldly, turning to leave. Mo was dumbstruck. The suddenly change also scared Wei Sheng and Luo Li. When had the two ever seen the elders so angry? Wei Sheng hesitated before asking, "Shitty, what did you do?" "Yeah." Luo Li couldn't resist. "Everyone's angry at you. You're going to die." Anyways, Mo heard it. This guy's words were full of laughter at his misfortunes. However, he wasn't in the mood to attend to that guy. Thinking about the good that Xianxia had said, his heart trembled. Just offending Master, his days would be difficult. This was good. In one stroke, he had completely offended all the elders, and from the tone, it seemed to be pretty severe. What made Mo even more depressed was that, up until now, he didn't even understand where the problem was. Theoretically, his display this time wasn't bad. Mo's heart shook. Only Wei Sheng looked thoughtful. Mo had no solution to the anger his master, Shu, and the sect leader held. However, he was extremely easygoing. Knowing that it was useless to worry, he didn't think about it any further. Thinking about the Kunlun introductory formation jade scroll that was going to be in his hands soon, the worry in his heart was washed away. As Shi Fengrong had come back from Dongfu Hall, the speed the three healed at increased greatly. After a few days, they could all stand and move. They only needed to calm down and rest for a while before they fully recovered. Already sick of lying on the bed, the three went to take a breather outside. On the mountain peak, the wind was very strong. The three of them enjoyed it immensely. Only after being stuck on the bed for so long did they knew how pleasurable it was to have the cold wind blowing like this. Looking at the figures hard at work below, Wei Sheng sighed, "Our sect is going to prosper." The mood of Wukong sword sect had transformed completely. Along the mountain valleys and in the woods, there were always figures of Wukong sword sect disciples working hard. All the disciples' eyes were full of admiration and respect, and they saw the three of them. The present Wukong sword sect was full of vitality and growth. The faces of the disciples were filled with confidence and motivation that they never had before. In their eyes this vitality Wei Sheng and the others could see hope and longing for the future of their sect. As they walked through the mountain, the three of them deeply felt it. Luo Li nodded. "Not bad, after this sword test conference, our sect's position in Sky Moon Jia is set. We are unable to be stopped." His eyes also flashed with yearning and hope. The prosperity of the sect meant the core disciples would get the greatest benefits. Cultivation was not an empty building. Without Jingshi, without materials, without spells, it was impossible to catch up to other people's cultivation speeds. Mo was slightly unfocused, his thought wandering. "Shitty, what are you thinking?" Wei Sheng noticed Mo's absent-mindedness. Mo focused and disguised, "I'm calculating what time I can get the prize." Wei Sheng couldn't help but grin. Luo Li's face was also helpless. But he then asked curiously, "You are so greedy, but why did you pick such a crappy item? There are so many good talismans." Wei Sheng and Luo Li had been very surprised by the jade scroll that Mo had picked. They had all assumed that Suemo would pick a fourth-grade talismans, or at the very least, the finest third-grade talisman. They hadn't expected that he would be a nondescript jade scroll. Suemo rolled his eyes. If you don't understand, don't talk. Luoli was not angry. He remembered just how ugly the sect leader and the others looked when Suemo had requested the jade scroll, and managed to understand why the sect leader and the others were so angry. He met Wei Xing's eyes and smiled. The two of them did not warn Suemo. Able to walk and move around, the three of them quickly moved back to their own residences. No one was willing to keep staying in fragrant ginger yard. Suemo moved back to his little west wind yard. Lazily soaking in the sun, when he occasionally raised his head, he could see silly bird on the rooftop posturing and showing off. If it was any other time, Suemo definitely would have thrown a stone. But there was a period of time since they saw each other. He found it was quite endearing. Xiao Guo was slicing up all kinds of fruits for Xixiang. Liang Feng Shiji had brought over the fruit. Liang Feng and Suemo were chatting. Haha, Shidi should quickly recover. This time, Shidi really shocked everyone. Everyone was left speechless when the ranking came out. Liang Feng suddenly thought of something. She smiled and said, Nan Menyang entered Dong Fu Hall and became Yubai's Shidi. As to Zhong Mingyan, supposedly he is very seriously wounded. Shidi has become the most unwelcome person of Dong Chi sword sect. Dong Fu has been very boring recently. Everyone is healing. The prices of recovery medicines of the market have been skyrocketing. Suemo chomped at the fruit, the juices flying as he mumbled, doesn't matter, it has nothing to do with me. Liang Feng smiled and said, Shidi needs to recover faster. There's many people that have come to my shop to ask if Shidi is taking orders. Shidi's reputation in formations has passed through all of Sky Moon Jia. Adding on your fame from the Golden Crow Pill, there has been many people that have placed orders. Suemo became alert. No news other than this could make him more excited. Right now, he was penniless. The gigantic formation belt he set up in the sword test conference had almost taken up all the materials he had bought from the 100 treasure flying pavilion. The prize he had picked was a jade scroll, and there wasn't one piece of jingsher there. So when he heard Liang Feng's news, his eyes became green. However, he thought and then shook his head. This has to wait until my wounds heal. That's natural. Liang Feng said. Shidi needs to rest and recover. When your body is good, you will have everything. Right, Elder Tian Songzi suddenly announced 2 days ago that the local Xiozha who entered the top 100 are allowed to enter the secret realm. Secret realm? Suomo's eyes were wide. He said in disbelief, Dong Fu Hall has a secret realm. They can bear to let us enter. Yes. Supposedly, it is to nurture the local younger generation. Elder Tian Songzi especially made the decision, Liang Feng said. The two chatted for a bit more but Suemo wasn't interested in chatting after Liang Feng's weighty news. Seeing the situation, Liang Feng left behind a lot of healing Lingdan and left. Seeing off Liang Feng, Suemo pushed Xiaoguo to practice the sword. He then sunk into thought. That same day, he made a decision, seclusion. Chapter 158 Seclusion. Suemo did not impulsively decide to enter into seclusion training. The wounds on his body were mostly healed. The only thing left was rest. He needed to calm down and organize what he had gained and lost this time. This sword test conference, what he had encountered was much more than he had originally imagined. Only now did he have the time to think about it. There were many things he wanted to ask Pu Yao, like splitting his consciousness. But when he had first opened his eyes after the conference, he found that Pu Yao was in the middle of meditation. No matter how he shouted and tried to get Pu to respond, it was useless. He could only work it out himself. There were too many things that he needed to think deeply about. Another important reason that he decided to enter seclusion was the news that Liang Feng had about the secret realm. Suemo knew what a secret realm was. Because he knew it was a rare opportunity, he decided to enter seclusion. There would be many opportunities inside the secret realm. If he was lucky and found some rare materials, he would really make a profit. But it would be wrong to think of the secret realm as his own Ling fields. Tian Songzi was allowing everyone to explore the secret realm, and this suggested that this secret realm was still unexplored, because if it had already been explored and all the rare materials had been taken away, then there would be no meaning to letting people explore it again. In the secret realm, other than the opportunities, what was more prominent was the danger. Secret realms were usually guarded by Yao beasts. The more rare and valuable the item, the stronger the guardian Yao beast was. Other than Yao beasts, what was harder to defend against was the hearts of people. Direct benefits meant direct conflicts of interest. Different from the competition of the Great Pine Pavilion, there would not be judges, no one calling a stop to fights. The fighting would be even more straightforward and bare. If someone killed for treasure, Suemo wouldn't be surprised. The world was like this. But it would be too stupid not to attend due to this risk. To be able to gain something, other than being lucky, it required strength. He might have been ranked third, but he knew his own strength. Luck was a major factor in his third-place ranking. The formations that he was skilled in were not suited for fighting. He guessed that the sect leader would have the 3 disciples from their sect to move together at that time. Undoubtedly, the 3-pronged trident of Wukong sword sect would form the strongest team. After them, it would probably be the team of Yu Bai and Nan Menyan. However, Suemo didn't want to drag the others down. Other Xiaoxia may avoid them due to their strength, but those Yao beasts wouldn't recognize them. There were too many comprehensions from this sword test conference that he needed to organize. He also needed to do a thorough examination of his 5-colored pagoda. Pu Yao was always unreliable at the most crucial times, Suemo thought irritably. Wukong Hall. He's in seclusion. Pei Yuanran said. Other than Xianxia, who was still cold and unaffected, the other 2 appeared to have a headache. Yen Lo rubbed his forehead and said, he does need to seclude himself and ponder the experiences he received this time. Ponder what? Shi Feng Rong was furious when it was mentioned. She clearly remembered the mockery from the audience. Ponder his formations? Or ponder how to make Jingshi? When she remembered how Suemo had asked him the prizes were being awarded when he heard he was third, anger poured out of her heart. Why did she have such a greedy disciple who didn't like the sword? She couldn't help but peek at the cold second Xixiang, the anger in her heart growing even stronger. She knew that second Xixiang was really angry this time. This little ruffian, he made second Xixiang angry. Shi Feng Rong raged. She decided to find a chance to sort out this lawless guy. No matter. Let him enter seclusion. Xianxia suddenly opened to the surprise of everyone else. They had grown together from childhood and knew each other very well. It just wasn't Shi Feng Rong who saw he was angry. Seeing Suemo continuing to delve further into formations and not study what was right, Xianxia did not stop him. According to their thinking, Xianxia should personally have gone and grabbed Suemo, severely punishing him and then guide him onto the proper path. Wukong Hall was a patch of silence. Everyone was shocked at Xianxia's attitude. In the silence, Xianxia's cold and pressuring voice echoed. I will make him understand why Sword Xiu can unite and lead the world of cultivation. Wukong Formation Sect. He can't go, the murderous and dark voice made the other 3 shudder. Sympathy came onto their faces. Suemo didn't know at this time just how decisive Xianxia's resolution was. He quickly received his prize. Just like he had imagined, this jade scroll came into his hands without a problem. His choice surprised many people. The sword test conference might have finished, but the events of the sword test conference still made waves in Dongfu. There were praises, and mockery. Suo Mo's choice was the most unexpected choice in the top 10. Whatever this scalping zombie did always surprised people. Suo Mo was not concerned with this. With the jade scroll in his possess, he had no more cares, perfect for seclusion. He burrowed into the stone room, and entered meditation. Inspecting the situation inside his body, he found his state was bad. The wounds he received this time were much more severe than he had imagined. Under Master's care, the channels in his body had basically healed, but compared to him at his peak, they had shrunk. Suo Mo decided to nurture of his channels. It was not difficult to nurture channels. It was only using Ling power to slowly permeate the channels and reawaking the vitality inside. However, it was a detailed job and especially demanded patience. Luckily, Suo Mo was not in a rush. Slowly nurturing the channels, he took the chance and examined his own body in detail. The Ling power would be absorbed by the Mo matrix automatically when it came close to him. The Mo matrix would automatically take in Ling power. What Suo Mo marveled at was that the Mo matrix, other than automatically taking in Ling energy, it was like a filter and automatically purified the power. Tempering Ling power was a step that was unavoidable in cultivation. Ling power that was not purified was not only unable to be used, but could also harm the body. But with the marvelous Mo matrix, Suo Mo did not need to spend time on purification. The problem of storing Ling power was still unresolved. The Ling power would be absorbed through the Mo matrix into the body, circulate through the channels, and dissipate inside the body. The greatest storage place inside his body for Ling power was his dantian. Compared to the Ling power that was absorbed into his body, it could only be considered a small pond. The remaining Ling power was unable to be stored. They flowed along the channels and dissipated into the body. Normal Xianxia needed to spend long periods of time to absorb Ling power, tempering it over and over to purify it. It would take a long time to fill the dantian. But Suo Mo felt the problem was not this. If a Xianxia was a container, and the amount of things this container could hold became smaller, then it definitely was a problem with the container. In other words, something was likely wrong with the dantian. His thoughts were very clear. As expected, when he focused his attention on his dantian, he finally understood why his cultivation would increase so slowly. The dantian was like a pool, and the Ling power the water inside the pool. However, this pool was marvelous in that, as the water rose, the walls of the pool would also rise. That way, the Ling power stored inside the body would increase. However, the problem was with the Mo matrix. He didn't know what that asshole, Pu Yao, was thinking. One region of the Mo matrix coincidentally passed through his dantian. It was like there were two holes in the wall of a pool, and once the water inside the pool rose above the height of the holes, the water would be lost. His Ling power was spilling out through the holes. These two holes were not small, so even though there was water constantly added to the pool, the height of water inside the pool would not rise. Suo Mo couldn't help but grimace. He really had tasted the bitterness of low cultivation in the sword test conference. His cultivation was not enough, it meant that he had no strength to face someone else in the open. Tricks may be hard for people to deal with, but if he used them too many times, it wouldn't work. Damn it. Even though he knew what the problem was, he didn't know what to do. Changing the dantian wasn't something a person like him who was just in Juji could accomplish. Without any other solution, he could only open his eyes. He could only slowly work on the problem of cultivation. It was useless to rush. He could only comfort himself with the fact that finally knew what the problem was, now he only had to slowly think of a solution. Compared to the pause in his Ling power, his consciousness had rising quickly, and without his knowledge, he had broken through to fifth breath. In the void above his sea of consciousness, there was another star. In reality, before the sword test conference, Mo didn't have many good feelings about the embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. It may have been able to increase Ling power, but its primary effect was strengthening the consciousness. For Mo, the consciousness had been far less important than Ling power. Even more, it was strong in cultivating his consciousness, but there was no way to use his consciousness. In a person as pragmatic as Mo's eyes, it was useless. But now, Mo placed much more importance on embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation than any other scripture or spell. That strange and indescribable state, the ethereal star dust, the feeling as though it was a part of his body. Mo looked at the five-colored pagoda in his hand. A feeling rose as though it was connected to his blood. The little pagoda was like a part of his body, intimate and familiar. The other reason he entered seclusion was for the five-colored pagoda. In the fight during that last great clash, he had been severely wounded, and the five-colored pagoda had also received severe damage. He had master to help heal him, but only he could work on the damage of the five-colored pagoda. The five-colored pagoda was dim and dull, and had cracks over the body. If it wasn't for the feeling of connectedness that existed between them, Mo would be suspicious that this wasn't his five-colored pagoda. Feeling the weakness passed on by the five-colored pagoda, Mo couldn't help but reach out and caress the five-colored pagoda. He closed his eyes, his mind sinking into the five-colored pagoda. Entering the five-colored pagoda, he jumped in fright. Inside the five-colored pagoda, the five balls of five-element essence were all dim, so faint that they appeared to be able to vanish at any moment. The ball of consciousness weakly floated in the middle of the five balls of elemental essence without any of the liveliness of before. If the five-colored pagoda had been the beginnings of a five-element world before, then this five-element world was now on the edge of disintegration. Mo's expression was terrible. The situation was worse than he had imagined. Chapter 159, Gains the Power of the Five-Colored Pagoda had left a deep impression on Mo. What was most precious was the feeling of connectedness as though it was his arm or finger. He had never felt the same with other talismans. It was hard to determine just how much he had imprinted on it, but it was now the most powerful talisman in Mo's possession. In Mo's eyes, it wasn't just a talisman. It could control the formations. Didn't that mean that he had an extra set of hands? He also had a feeling inside that if the five-colored pagoda really was ruined, he would also be affected. There were never such beneficial and fortuitous incidents in this world. If it was connected deeply to him as though it were his arms, then if his arms broke, how could he be unaffected? No matter the cost, he needed to fix the five-colored pagoda. Mo gritted his teeth. He took out all the materials from his ring and threw them inside the pagoda. The five-colored pagoda seemed extremely hungry. When the materials left his hands, they were sucked away. One by one, the materials entered the five-colored pagoda and were deconstructed and converted into the five elemental essences. Mo saw the materials flow like water into the five-colored pagoda and felt pain. These materials were all bought with large sums of jingsha. Now, they had all been fed to the five-colored pagoda. However, what comforted him slightly was this solution was extremely effective. The cracks on the body of the five-colored pagoda slowly disappeared with speed visible to the naked eye. He could feel the five-element world inside the five-colored pagoda being supplied by large amounts of five-element essence and gradually stabilize. But the empty ring left Mo with a feeling of heartache. Competing in the sword test conference had completely cost him all his wealth. He had an impulse to spit blood. What he wanted to spit blood at even more was the five-colored pagoda hadn't fully recovered even as the last bit of material was absorbed. Compared to the pagoda's original condition, it was still much dimmer in color. Heavens, how large of a quantity of materials would be needed to completely repair it? How much jingsha would that require? Mo didn't just have any jingsha, and he had no materials left at all. It's been a long time since he was so poor. Just at this time, a ball of substance that appeared to be grey mud flew out of the five-colored pagoda into Zhuomo's palm. Hm. Zhuomo stilled. This was the first time he had seen the five-colored pagoda spit something out. Quickly, the five-colored pagoda passed on information that allowed him to understand what this grey mud was. Everything belonged to the five elements. This was an extremely broad generalization. In this world, there were still a few things that did not belong to the five elements. The little ball of grey mud in Zhuomo's hands would be the remnants after the five-colored pagoda deconstructed the materials into the five elemental energies. These remains did not belong inside the five elements, so it was not absorbed by the five-colored pagoda and was pushed out. The corners of Zhuomo's eyes jerked. Eat mine, drink mine, and now shitting on my hand. The brat, he was lawless. Burning in rage, he raised his hand to throw the grey mud at the five-colored pagoda. The five-colored pagoda seemed to know Zhuomo was angry and skipped away to dodge. But the hand Zhuomo raised up suddenly stopped, the anger inside disappearing without a trace. It did not belong inside the five elements. Right, this stuff didn't belong inside the five elements. Five elements contain all. There were extremely small number of things that were not, and without an exception these items were all extremely rare. These days, what did rarity mean? One word, expensive. Zhuomo suddenly became excited. That's right, the rarer it was, the more expensive it was. The grey mud in his hands was not inside the five elements and definitely should be valuable. Thinking about it, he carefully scraped the mud off his hands into a jade bottle and then put the jade bottle inside a sandalwood box before putting it inside the ring. Sometime in the future, he should inquire to how much jingsha the grey mud was worth. The five-colored pagoda temporarily stabilized. Zhuomo's mood was better now that he found another use for the five-colored pagoda. Looking at the five-colored pagoda, he was reminded of his consciousness and the stardust the stars in his consciousness had slowly scattered. However, when he inspected his consciousness, there had not been any change. That was normal. With the slow speed that the stars shed off star dust, it would take a long time for the star dust to spread into the entirety of his consciousness. Zhuomo speculated a large amount of stardust was needed to create evident change. Of course, it could also just be his dream. Maybe there would not be a change at all. He quickly threw the problem of the consciousness to one side. Formations. His abilities with formations had surprised people, and also increased his confidence. Whenever he thought about the peerless power of the moon chime sound storm, of the sky ring moon chime formation, he still couldn't help but become excited. 1 against 5, each person multiple times stronger than him. Even if it was only one move, and it was the five-colored pagoda controlling it, even if it was a fight inside the formation belt. Even so, that battle was something that he would never have been able to imagine before. Even now, he still felt it was like a dream. Without sleep or rest, nor drink and food, he muttered to himself like he was sleep-talking, and laughed excitedly like he was insane. When he finished reading the last analysis in the Jade Scroll, he was extremely depressed. An introductory Jade Scroll could have such power. What he gained was multiple times what he had imagined. He was like a child that had been swimming in a pond and suddenly saw the ocean. Is Xixiang going to seclusion again? Xiaogua asked timidly. Oh, no. There's no jingsha to get in seclusion. Zhuomo lazily said. He suddenly thought of a question and asked, where are eldest Xixiang and Luo Li Xixiang? What are they busy with? Hearing that Zhuomo wasn't going back into seclusion, Xiaogua's eyes turned to crescents. Eldest Xixiang and Luo Li Xixiang are all in seclusion. Zhuomo made a sound of acknowledgement. He wasn't surprised. Dong Fu. The sword test conference had finished. All the experts went back to their own homes. Dong Fu instantly became less lively. Of course, compared to the Dong Fu of the past, it was much more prosperous. This year's sword test conference had caused Dong Fu to stand out in the 13 primary towns. Not long in the future, it would be the time Tian Song Zi promised to open the secret realm. Even though they could not attend, but many still stayed, especially those who desperately needed certain hard-to-obtain materials. What secret realms were most famous for was producing all kinds of treasures. Larger material merchants also sent people to wait. Xuemo rode Silly Bird, and headed straight to the 100 Treasures Flying Pavilion. There were many more people in the 100 Treasures Flying Pavilion which surprised him. Coming for the second time, he was not as cautious as before. Welcoming Xuemo was still the same storekeeper as last time. When he saw Xuemo, he congratulated, "Congratulations, congratulations. Mr. Zhuo really is extraordinary. That last attack made my heart stop." Then he pushed his voice lower and said, "He, many thanks to Mr. Zhuo." Xuemo stilled. "How so?" Mr. Zhuo had great skill to forge the 5-colored pagoda into a soul-tethered talisman. Our store also has benefited. Xuemo finally understood. However, what he realized was not the increase in the customers, but why the 5-colored pagoda was so powerful now. So it had become his soul-tethered talisman. To a guy like him who had made deep study of talismans, how could he not know soul-tethered talismans? Soul-tethered talisman. He was slightly excited but did not show it on his face. Just like usual, he grasped the main point. "Ha, that's great. In the future, give me a bit of a discount." Hearing this, the storekeeper could only laugh along. Xuemo was not concerned, asking, "Is Miss Su here?" "Yes, please come with me." The storekeeper hurriedly reached forward to usher him, clearly having already received orders. Chapter 160, Intense Fire. Dan Su had been waiting for Xuemo for a long time. Even though she was uncertain that Xuemo would aid her since she had not helped Xuemo like originally planned. She waited rather than going to Wukong Mountain due to her trust in Lin Qian. For some unknown reason this extremely mysterious youth instilled her with confidence. "When do we begin?" Xuemo asked. "I'm not in a hurry." A jade bottle appeared on Su's hand. "This is Fort Chao's Intense Fire, Dan. Consume it first, I'll help you stabilize the medicine power." He hesitated but still took the jade bottle. Opening it, he could feel a wave of heat flood out of the jade bottle. Lying inside were beads that seemed to be carved out of red jade. The stalagmite fire was a cold fire. The fire power in this Intense Fire Dan was clearly hot fire. The two were of completely different attributes. It would most likely be troublesome to merge them together. However, Xuemo still decided to try because he had consumed the Golden Crow pills which contained the Golden Crow fire, which was also a hot fire. The two sat in the seclusion room with Su positioned behind Xuemo. Intense Fire Dan was made from underground lava. It contains lava, earth, fire and is extremely domineering. You have to be careful. Su did not waste words, putting her hand on Xuemo's back. Xuemo shoved an Intense Fire Dan into his mouth. Once the Intense Fire Dan entered his mouth, it turned to an extremely hot stream of energy. This hot stream was boiling like it was lava. Xuemo felt as though it would burn through his body. As expected, it truly was domineering. Not daring to slack off, Xuemo hurriedly channeled Ling power to surround this bright red hot stream. If he allowed this hot stream to run rampant through his body, it would quickly damage his channels. Xuemo's skin that was exposed to the air suddenly became bright red like glowing hot metal. Su didn't dare to slack off either, channeling Ling power to carefully permeate Xuemo's body. Xuemo detected Ling power entering from his back. He did not panic but carefully inspected it. His consciousness was extremely large. Since his body was definitely his home field, he easily saw through Su's Ling power. Such a strange Ling power. Suemo couldn't help but be interested. Su's Ling power was not flowing like water, but like countless moving strands. It seemed to be composed of countless little fish into schools and was extremely unique. He remembered that Su's sword scripture was magnetic power. Was this the trick to it? Suemo noted it down. Su could never dream that as she helped Suemo digest the medicinal power, Suemo managed to comprehend some of the intricacies of her Ling power. It really wasn't that she was inattentive, but Suemo's present consciousness was far outside of the expectations of normal people. Who would think a Zhuji would have such a large consciousness? Suemo finally experienced just how great the gap was between Ningmai and Zhuji. Su's Ling power was not fierce, but it was endless. When the domineering intense fire Dan was surrounded by this Ling power, it was unable to move. Suemo knew it was time for him to act. What Su could do was help him stabilize the medicinal power, but only he could process it. He didn't immediately let his Ling power stream over, but used his consciousness to inspect the strong and domineering medicinal power. Su carefully controlled her Ling power. Since it was inside Suemo's body, her control was greatly decreased. After a moment, Suemo's Ling power was still motionless without any intentions of going forward. Why wasn't he doing anything? She furrowed her brows. She didn't understand why Suemo was procrastinating. Did he not know how to process medicinal power? Just as she felt puzzled, Suemo's Ling power suddenly moved. Two thin tendrils of Ling power charged at the medicinal power she was stabilizing. Just this little bit of Ling power. She was slightly discontent. What was this guy doing? Using this little bit of Ling power, how long would it take to process all the medicinal power? She securely held on to the medicinal power, but the medicinal power of the intense fire Dan was extremely domineering. Even though it was caught in the grasp of her Ling power, but it was like the wild beast in a cage and struggled to break free. Her Ling power was slowly being consumed, even if the rate was not fast. At this time, another two streams of Ling power went to the back of the medicinal power. Still not enough. Su wanted to remind Suemo that processing medicinal power required large amounts of Ling power, and for him not to skimp on Ling power at this time. Before she could speak, there was another two streams of Ling power. Two streams. Another two. In an extremely short period of time, Suemo's Ling power turned to 80-something slender streams of Ling power. Su gaped with wide eyes. What was this? The scene that took place was completely out of her imagination. The 80-something streams of Ling power were like extremely slippery earthworms that burrowed into the Ling power she had wrapped around the intense fire Dan. In the blink of an eye, the domineering and explosive medicinal power was cut by Suemo's tiny Ling power into 7 or 8 pieces. Looking at the domineering medicinal power slowly nibbled away by those tiny Ling power. No, it wasn't nibbling. Even though they moved bit by bit, but the processing speed was extremely fast. In a short moment, there was only a little bit of the medicinal power left. Quickly, all the medicinal power of the intense fire Dan had been processed. What remained after processing was a strand of extremely pure deep red fire power. Suemo could feel the terrifying temperature contained in this tiny bit of fire power. It was all the essence of the entire intense fire Dan, and it was Suemo's target. It was rare to see such pure fire power, even if it was just a thread. Thinking about what Su had said, that the intense fire Dan was made from lava deep underground, it was no wonder that the fire power contained was so pure. In the descriptions of flames in the Fire Bead chapter, all kinds of earth fire were not low-grade fire seeds. This pure thread of earth fire, to him, it was the best nourishment. Suemo carefully controlled the stalagmite fire. As the stalagmite fire appeared, a dark and cold presence instantly spread. The milky white stalagmite fire quickly wrapped around a thread of deep red earth fire. One was ean and cold, the other was hot, yet the two strangely merged together. Xuemo could clearly feel that a wondrous change had occurred after the stalagmite fire had absorbed this thread of earth fire. However, limited by the amount of earth fire, the change could not be clearly seen. This surprised him. The trouble he had predicted did not occur. The entire merging process was so smooth he was shocked. There were 36 intense fire dan. In other words, there were still 35 threads of earth fire. He began to feel anticipation. If all 36 threads of lava earth fire was merged into the stalagmite fire, what change would occur? Since there was no problems with the merging, Xuemo instantly increased his speed, throwing another intense fire dan into his mouth. Su steadily stabilized her Ling power. Without her notice, a layer of fine sweat appeared on her forehead. She started to feel the burden. Xuemo's speed was truly too fast, processing one pill after the next. She didn't have a chance to breathe and rest. She desired very much to stop, but she suppressed it. Ningmai Xiaoxia asking Zhuji to stop and rest, she couldn't say it. Even more, all she had to do was just stabilize the medicinal power. The Ling power consumed in processing was even greater. Xuemo hadn't relented, so how could she? She could only bear it. Up until now, she did not understand how Xuemo did all this. It should have been the person doing the processing who used up Ling power more quickly, but up until now, after more than 10 intense fire dan, Xuemo did not show any signs of exhaustion. How was it possible? He was just a Zhuji Xiaoxia. Su gritted her teeth. Her Ling power was tightly wrapped around the medicinal power of the intense fire dan. Xuemo's Ling power needed to go through her Ling power in order to interact with the medicinal power, so she clearly perceived every movement of Xuemo's Ling power. But even if she knew, she still found it impossible. Xuemo used several dozen streams of Ling power, each of which was controlled extremely delicately. It was clear that this was not the first time he had done this. This was the first time she had seen a processing method like Xuemo's strange one. She couldn't help but admire Xuemo's idea. To cut the medicinal power into multiple parts, dividing before processing. It could greatly increase the efficiency. What shocked her was each of the tiny streams of Ling power were as sharp as knives. Their power may have been small, but they could easily cut the medicinal power into little pieces. She had more experience and her cultivation was much higher than Xuemo's, so she naturally understood how he accomplished it. He only needed to find the weakest spot in the medicinal power to achieve this result. But the crux of the problem was, how could Xuemo be so fast and accurate in finding the most fragile place on the medicinal power? Her Ling power was wrapped around the medicinal power, but she knew she couldn't do such a thing. Not just her, even her Shixianggu Rongping definitely could not do such a delicate task. This was probably Xuemo's secret. Having thought it through, the shock in Su's mind gradually faded. Each person had their own skills. A person that displayed such talent at the sword test conference like Xuemo, must have some unique talent. Her mind calming down, she started to admire Xuemo's performance. Xuemo's fine control of Ling power truly could live up to the word performance. Several dozen strands of Ling power were being controlled according to his wishes, cooperating among themselves easily like an army. They all had their individual tasks combining to create the larger picture. The explosive and domineering medicinal power in comparison was like a gigantic beast which only looked fierce yet had no substance, and was easily dismembered. The entire process was fast and accurate, clean and crisp without any unnecessary movements. Seeing them move was a pleasure. However, this also exposed that Xuemo's Ling power was not strong. It was beneficial in formations to have strong fine control over Ling power, but for sword scriptures, there were not many benefits. In a short period of time, Su made her conclusion. In her eyes, Zhuo Mo was still strong, but this strength was different than others. His weakness was also clear. In other words, Zhuo Mo's strength could only be expressed under certain conditions. She thought about the sword test conference and the shocking formation that Zhuo Mo had set up. Hadn't he created an environment where he could use his strength? She couldn't help but shake her head. In her eyes, a strength like Zhuo Mo was superficial, he had too many limitations. Sword cultivation was the correct path. No matter the circumstances, sword Xiu could grasp their own fate. Thinking about it, she strengthened her resolve to cultivate the sword, full of anticipation towards the sword billet that was to be forged. 6 hours later, the last intense fire Dan landed in his stomach and quickly turned into a thread of lava earth fire. As the 36th thread of lava earth fire merged, the stalagmite fire suddenly changed. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.